the meeting. Okay. All right. So let's call the meeting to order. What did I do to this thing? To the Independent Transportation Surtax Oversight Board, November 19th, 2021. Ms. Thompson, can we get a roll call, please?
Sure, Chair. Alan Hooper.
Here.
Doug Kuhlman. Doug Kuhlman. Phil Allen.
Here.
Ronald Frazier.
Here.
Dr. Kelly. Allison Love. Here. Deborah Madden. Anthea Pennant.
Here.
And Shay Smith.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Okay, I guess this is the moment for public participation. Is there anybody in the public that would like to say a few words or address the board? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next item. We've got action items. We need a motion to approve the minutes of the August 20th board meeting.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
Okay, do we have any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Okay, number 2 is a motion to approve the surtax funding in the not-to-exceed amount of $2.75 million for up to 5 years for a Broward County Transit Community Micro Transit Pilot Program. Do we want to, are we going to have any kind of presentation? Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, good morning, Chair Hooper, distinguished members of the Oversight Committee Board. My name is Nicholas Sofel. You might remember me. I think I spoke to you a year ago in my former capacity as in the innovation team for Matt Badman. I am now over at BCT, settled in over the last year, and I'm once again here to present some innovative mobility solutions for your consideration today. The very first program is a community microtransit pilot program. So this is the program where we're going to be using to try to facilitate connectivity in areas of the county where we don't quite have the densities supportive of fixed route transit service. And we want to be able to still provide critical linkages for connectivity for those particular areas where we know there's still demand in the community, but we just don't have the numbers to justify, let's say, a community shuttle or a fixed route bus. So the goal is on the slide to provide convenient and flexible on-demand transit options to complement the BCT Community Shuttle Program. So what we did was we really want to focus on some of these areas of the county where they've either had community shuttle service or have requested, either had community shuttle service that has not been successful to rise to the level of meeting our 7.1 passengers per hour threshold, or areas of the county that have requested service, but through our service analysis, we've determined that the area would not really be a good candidate for that type of service. So what microtransit is, its ability to kind of mesh together the best of both worlds of the best of transit with the convenience of a TNC like an Uber or a Lyft. And it provides the ability for folks to be able to hail a ride on a mobile app through a smartphone or via online, or even, we can even have a call center, which is on there as well for people who don't have access to smartphones. But the idea is for folks that live within these designated zones, you can actually get a trip to your exact destination, to pick you up where you are and drop you off anywhere within that zone. It would be free of fare, so because it's complementary to the community shuttle system, designed for circulation within the microtransit zone, but also to be able to get people out to our main trunk lines for BCT service. So if you live deep within the community, and we know we have some suburban neighborhoods where there's not really good street connectivity, and for you to walk, from your house to, let's say, one of our BCT main lines, it might look on a map like the way the crow flies. It might look like it's a half a mile walk, but in reality, it might be 2 miles by the time you go all around through the community and get out to the exit. These types of services will actually meet them where they live and then bring them to their destinations. So this is a very exciting solution for us. In developing this pilot program, we pulled information from across the nation. So we looked at pilot programs and microtransit implementations over in LA Metro. We looked over in DART in Dallas. We looked at Miami-Dade, where they have a very successful program right now to provide first and last mile connectivity from the Metro Rail. And we also looked at other partners within the state, HART in Tampa, JTA in Jacksonville. So we wanted to pull kind of the best information from across the nation to be able to come up with the best pilot we could for this particular implementation. So the request is for a turnkey pilot implementation. And what a turnkey means is every aspect of the service is provided under the single contract. So that means we're going to have a vendor that's going to provide the technology, the actual app, the software. So when you pull up, you can book your trip and have that dynamic routing. They're going to be providing the actual physical vehicles that will be used for the service. They'll be providing the operations of the service, the operators. They'll provide the maintenance. They'll be providing some marketing, the cleaning of the buses, and pretty much everything soup to nuts that's revolving microtransit service is going to be done through the vendor. The idea of this is so that we can first get this thing rolling as quickly as possible for this pilot program. Our proposal is for an initial 3-year contract with an option of 2 one-year extensions. The idea is it usually takes about 6 months for any transit service to ramp up before you really know how successful it is. Then we're going to need some time to evaluate how it's actually going. We're going to get a lot of feedback from our customers. And in doing so, we expect that through the pilot program, we're going to be making some adjustments. We might end up having to adjust the span of service. We might have to adjust the geographic area of some of these microtransit zones might be tweaked a little bit. But through that process, we want to develop the most efficient service we can for the public and kind of have a proof of concept moving forward for microtransit services. At the end of the 3-year period, we'll have the option, if we want to renew, for an additional 2 years, for up to a total of 5 years. That's for, let's say it's going really well and there's really no reason to make any changes or to go out again for another solicitation. We have 2 more years where we could potentially go out and not, upend the apple cart if things are going well. If we want to make a change, we'll have the option at that point, at the end of that 3 years, to go ahead and do that. One of the reasons why you have a 3-year pilot, though, because it seems a little bit long for most pilot programs, is really because when these operators have to make investments, like in providing vehicles, there's a capital cost to that. And they need to be able to recoup their costs of the investments they're making in the service. And if we make the duration of a pilot too short, we feel like we'll either not be able to fully vet the service, but it also is going to significantly increase our costs on the provider to be able to recoup the fact that they're having to put a lot of front-end money, into the software development and into the development of the vehicles. So I already went through here. There's going to be 5 microtransit service zones. Let's talk a little bit about this. So 3 of the zones are areas where we have had community shuttle service and it's just not working out. It's the routes are struggling. They're not doing very well. And so we're trying to use this as an ability at a very similar, so if you look at the cost cost per trip of poorly performing community shuttle routes, and these are routes that maybe have service maybe once every 60 minutes. We're not talking about a very high level of service for some of these poorly performing community shuttle routes. The cost of offering microtransit, where we're going to be guaranteeing a 15-minute maximum wait time per passenger, is roughly equivalent to what a poorly performing community shuttle would be. So we're trying to provide, at a very similar cost per passenger, a much higher level of connectivity and service. And that's kind of the benefit of adding microtransit to our suite of mobility options that we're developing over at BCT. As I mentioned, it's going to be free of fare because it's complementary to the community shuttle program. So we don't want to charge anyone for this service. The microtransit trips will provide up to 3 miles. We did a lot of research and talked to a lot of providers across the country. And what happens is, if you develop microtransit zones that have larger trips than 3 miles, your wait times start to become really inefficient for folks to find this system to be convenient. You'll end up with wait times of 20 and 30 minutes plus, and that's really not the kind of service we want to be able to have with microtransit. So it's really about targeting the right areas, trying to facilitate trips no more than 3 miles, and being able to guarantee a 15-minute maximum wait time as a standard across the board in each service zone. We set an initial service span from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That wasn't consistent with other agencies we saw across the country. However, I want to stress that because this is a pilot project, that it's completely modifiable. If we are working within the zones and we're receiving customer feedback, we expect that we might get feedback that says, hey, we really need this service to start at 6 a.m. instead of 7 a.m., or we need it to start at 5:30 a.m., or we need it to go later if it's a community that's more coastal and maybe has some more late night activities. We're going to be flexible to that as a part of this pilot program, and we're going to be receiving that customer information and feedback as we go through the pilot program. Our scope has a preference for no and low emission vehicles. We didn't want to mandate at this point low and no emission vehicles just because of the time to get some of that infrastructure set up and the costs associated with it, but we will be providing a preference for that in the scope. The vendor has to provide a fleet that meets all state and federal requirements for operations on all roadways, including arterials. So what this means is you might have seen some of these low-speed vehicles operating kind of microtransit type service in some of our coastal areas, using kind of low-speed golf cart-esque type vehicles, that fall under Florida statute for low-speed vehicles. Those vehicles will not be eligible under this particular solicitation because we're going to be providing service out in the suburbs along arterials that have speed limits greater than 35 miles an hour. So that actually increases the cost of the service because we need to make sure we're providing real vehicles, real safe vehicles that meet all state and federal compliance. We will have Matt Broward branding on every single vehicle. So unlike the community shuttle system right now, which you see that a lot of the municipalities have kind of branded each system themselves, where they have, you can see the Lauderdale shuttle, for instance, in Fort Lauderdale, or other systems, Lauderdale Transit. This system is going to be completely branded as a Broward County service, and it's going to be a Matt Broward service. And we're going to be able to see that on the road. So this project is going to have a great amount of visibility throughout the cities to be able to see that. They're not going to be unmarked vehicles. You're not going to be able to not see that we're providing the service. We want to make it highly visible to the public that this is a service that we're offering. The other ability of having common branding is that if we have common branding across our fleet, we have the ability to rotate vehicles to different service zones depending on service demand. So let's say we initially set out and we have 2 vehicles per service zone, but then we find out through the program that in Central County Municipal Services District, they have a real peak crunch in midday for whatever reason. Schools are getting out or something's going on. We can actually relocate and shuffle buses from our other zones to then meet that demand and then have them go back to their standard zone. So they have the flexibility to be able to scale the system across the various zones because we don't have branding per zone. The branding is of the system, which provides us a great amount of flexibility and will provide us some cost savings as well. In the end, we really feel that this is going to be a great program. We're very excited about it. I just want to note we have a separate initiative through our general planning consulting contract where we're going to be providing for monitoring standards and benchmarking for this pilot project as we're going. So we're not just going into it without monitoring the performance. We're going to have a performance monitoring plan, a benchmarking plan. They're also going to be assisting us to create a marketing plan for these services. So we're excited about that. And just to put the note in there, that's a part of our general planning consulting contract. We have CBEs on that contract. And the CBEs on that contract are going to be helping us to create the marketing strategies, for these implementations. So that gives us another ability to be able to kind of make that CBE connection in with this new service. So we're very excited about that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on this one. This is a great program. We're excited to get it rolling.
Mr. Allen.
I'm sorry. A couple questions. service is within district only, within the service area?
Correct. So what makes the service feasible, and economical, and keeping those wait times low is that there's a designated geofence service area. And that service area is set where that there'll be no trip greater than 3 miles. And that keeps that wait time at an acceptable level where we can promise folks a 15-minute wait or less for the service.
So people can access the service through a smartphone application. They can call the dispatch center.
Correct. So three ways of booking. You can either book through the smartphone, that predominantly across other implementations nationwide, that's the predominant use. Most people are going to be able to book those trips through the smartphone application. Second way to do it is through a mobile website. You can do it that way. Or for folks who do not have access to smartphones, there will be a call center that has to be in operation the entire span of service plus an hour or two before and after service ends to be able to answer any customer inquiries and also to be able to book trips for folks who don't have access to smartphones.
Have you started the acquisition process?
We have a scope prepared, and we're planning on planning on going to the board to have approval for the concept to move forward, and we'll have an RFP out on the street sometime early next year.
So, and your target date for commencing the service?
I would love to be able to start before the end of this next fiscal year, so before September. One of the issues that's kind of a little challenging right now, you might be aware it's very difficult to get vehicles. There's kind of a backlog in the whole vehicle pipeline right now with the chip crisis and whatnot. So we're expecting that the time to procure the vehicles on the vendor side might be a little bit longer than we would usually anticipate for an implementation like this.
Ms. Pennant
Chair.
and Mr. Frazier.
All right, so, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for this presentation. I've been looking forward to hearing from you. I have quite a few questions, so bear with me a little bit.
Sure.
There are a couple of things that I wanted to know. You said that they're gonna have control of the app and the marketing and so on and so forth. And then I wanna know, are you going to have rights to that, whatever they're collecting? How are you providing some oversight so to ensure that they're not fudging the numbers or whatever it is? That's one question.
That's a great question. So as a part of the our solicitation RFP, we're requiring that that the vendor provides us all information and data, to Broward County. And there's going to be a very robust monitoring program. We actually want to be able to have our own kind of look into their system. So we're not going to be provided. So it's not going to be
That
we get
they're
it third
handing
hand
you
through a
data.
spreadsheet. We're actually going to be able to have a tap in to their network, into their system. And we're also really excited for that data because let's say we find through a couple of years of the implementation that we're seeing a lot of origins and destinations to the same locations. That might tell us, hey, we actually might be able to do a shuttle service here instead, and we might be able to morph the service into something else by receiving that data. We're able to see that there's, or we can see that there's greater needs in the market for certain distinct areas. So that's another really good value of this, is that we're going to be looking at all the data and analyzing that as it goes, where people are coming, where people are going, and most importantly, monitoring to make sure they're meeting our service requirement of no more than a 15-minute wait. That's going to be critical in the compliance on the vendor side.
Okay, that's good. The other question I wanted to know was, the other thing that I wanted to know was, why 5 zones? It seemed, I don't know, when I looked at the price tag for this program, I was a little shocked, right? And I keep thinking of a pilot being something so much smaller. So I'm curious to know, why 5 zones? And, could we start at a smaller scale? Because we don't know if it's gonna work, right? This is something that is being proposed, and I somehow feel like it should be a smaller project. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is, do we have local companies, and you may not know this might be something for Sandy, do we have local companies that have the capacity to take on a project like that? So if we're gonna spend $13 million, I wanna know that a local-based company has the ability to do so. I'm also wanting to know, in addition to them doing work with CBEs, that they're looking to employ locally as well from some of those communities that they're seeking to serve.
Sure. So I can start by addressing the number of zones. So we started off looking at what municipality, we have some of these cities. So let me give an example. Town of Hillsborough Beach, right? smaller community. They've been a partner in the community shuttle program since 1993. They have been in this program, but they have seen over the years their ridership degrade over time, to the point now where it's just not quite feasible, for that service. So given that they've been a long-term partner of the county, we really were trying to go back to the drawing board and say, well, what can we offer these communities so we're still providing them connectivity? And so that's how, for instance, Hillsborough Beach, became added to the service. The same story kind of goes for West Park and for this western area in Hollywood. So we're not talking about Hollywood East and the beach where all the activity centers are. We're talking about where the community is out to the west, where they don't have the same level of connectivity. We're talking about areas of Hollywood, between 441 and the Turnpike, where there really isn't the same level of connectivity as you have out by the beach in those areas. We wanted to make sure that we provided these folks, a level of connectivity and service. So we had those three municipalities that we really wanted to provide some sort of assistance to be able to get them some connectivity. And then the two areas in the BMSD, in the unincorporated area, these were areas that we committed to as a part of the surtax initially to provide them some level of community level circulation. That was a commitment that we made through the surtax process. We did our due diligence on our side at BCT, and we really came out to a conclusion that microtransit is going to be best served for those areas. So we want to make sure we get those in, because that's actually a commitment that we made to the voters in that area, that we would provide them some level of community level circulation. We do feel, as I mentioned before, the cost of this service is very similar to the cost of what a struggling or a not as good community shuttle route would be. So to give kind of an example, we offer paratransit services, right? Those operate at about 1.5 passengers per hour, and the cost per trip a lot of times averages around $33 per trip. It's expensive. On our fixed route services, it goes down to about $4 per passenger trip. And on struggling community shuttles, it's usually around $13 per trip. We're expecting this to be about in that range, in that $13 per passenger trip. So we do feel that we'll be able to get a certain level of efficiency out of it. The overall cost is just because this is a turnkey implementation. So they have to provide for the vehicles, they have to provide for meeting all the federal and local regulations. Just to give an idea of the magnitude of cost, Miami-Dade implemented a microtransit system not so long ago. The cost of the actual service to the agency is close to $50 per revenue hour of service. So,
and how is that working for them? I mean,
it's working very well for them. So they're using it a little bit differently than we are, because they have high capacity networks. They have Metro Rail, so they're using this as a first and last mile connection to get people to the Metro Rail. And it's been very successful for them, in that respect. They also have a separate zone operated with a municipality to do something similar that we're doing, where it's community level circulation, also doing well on that. So, I envision long term, we'll ultimately be using microtransit more to provide first and last mile connection once we build our high capacity network. So at the point that we start to implement our BRT service, or light rail service that comes out of our transit systems plan and moving along, I envision that microtransit is going to become a much bigger player in providing that first and last mile test case.
all right, I'm going to try to restrain myself. It's just sometimes I think about how much we spend for additional buses, general buses, right? So we approved that previously, and now we're doing this, and I keep thinking, are they going to be competing for the same residents, And could we just roll out in phases where we're doing two communities first, and let's get some data from that and see how it's working? It just seemed like a big hit, 13 million.
Well, it's 2.75 million per year. We don't have to go. We wanted the options to be able to extend beyond 3 years. So if we ended the program at 3 years, you would be closer to the $9 and change million mark. But we wanted to have the ability, if everything is going well, why go back out again? We could continue this on for a 5-year term if we decided to do so, or we would have the time to evaluate and then switch. The other piece I want to bring up is that when you look at the communities we're targeting, so you have Hillsborough Beach in the north, Central County BMSD, and Central County Broadview Park. And then in the south, the communities of West Park and west areas of Hollywood. That gives us a lot of geographic diversity as well for the pilot. So you're seeing these dollars and these monies being spent, across the county in various communities, also different types of communities. We have a coastal community in Hillsborough Beach where they have to go out to the barrier island. We have the Central County communities, and in one of our zones in the south and West Hollywood, we're actually making connections to Broward County, Broward College South. So that's a kind of a college university-based implementation. So by having the diversity of these zones, we're able to test different use cases, of it. And that's part of the point, too, of having the number of zones that we decided to settle on.
Excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Frazier.
I have two questions. One deals with your selection criteria. You've mentioned these 5 communities. You didn't indicate the criteria that was used to select them. And I wanted to know whether any of these are underserved communities. I know the names, but I don't know the census tract information.
Absolutely.
The second part
Go ahead.
deals with the economic side, and that is you're going to select vendors to provide those services, and you have mentioned CSVs will be a part of it. In terms of that procurement solicitation, are you going to be able to put into that solicitation that the primary vendor, if in fact has to utilize CBE partners or joint ventures or subcontractual relationships? Usually on the business side, people forget about that. They're looking at employment, but I'm also looking at how businesses could be a part of this operating system.
Sure. Great question. So I'll start by addressing the first one, underserved communities. So Hillsborough Beach, as you might be aware, is quite a wealthy community, right, on the coast, on the barrier island. We always talk about, they have the Hillsborough Mile, but the folks who need to travel there are not those same people who need to travel there via transit, but they still need connectivity to get there for employment opportunities. That corridor is served by no current BCT fixed route services, so there is zero connectivity via transit. So that's going to provide a critical link for anyone who does need to work along that stretch of Hillsborough Mile to be able to get to that place. We also, that zone actually also not just encompasses the town of Hillsborough Beach, it actually comes inland to Pompano, because we need folks to be able to make connections from our fixed route services that operate around Federal Highway, and then using the microtransit to get them out to the barrier island and to Hillsborough. The unincorporated areas, BMSD and Broadview Park and in Central County, have always been some of our historically disadvantaged communities. And we're going to provide them that connectivity to be able to get them to our main lines. Particularly in Broadview Park, there are some folks that live in areas there where if you look at the street grid, you might have to walk for miles just to get to our 441 corridor bus. So this is going to provide them connectivity to be able to get there, but also to be able to make some local community connections. Like for instance, at Broadview Park community, where the zone actually extends north along 441 to get to Plantation General Hospital and some of the retail there. It also gets to the east, so we start to connect in some grocery stores, and so we can try to make sure that we have access to fresh foods and things of that nature. And then in the south, West Park has always been an area that also needs connectivity and service, and this west area in Hollywood as well. So these are areas that are not the areas you think of the cities. These are not the areas you see on the postcard. When you think about the city of Hollywood, for instance, this is not the Young Circle area. This is not the beach. This is the community out west by 441 corridor. And so these are folks that really need that linkages. In terms of the CBE vendor situation, we are working with Sandy's group to try to determine if we have capacity to be able to utilize CBEs on this contract. It might be at this current time, there might not be a vendor that's able to have the capacity to implement this on the time frame that we have. That being said, I just came back from the American Public Transportation Association Expo in Orlando last week, and I had the privilege of speaking to a couple vendors who operate service that are interested in CBE certification, and I certainly encourage them to go through that process so we have more competition and we have more availability of CBEs in our market that can provide these types of services.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation so far. So I'm interested in these newer solutions and these pilot programs, but where I get a little bit stuck, and I think just for the record what the litmus test is here, is it going to decrease congestion, right, in the county? That's what we're here to try and do. So to me, that means, are cars going to come off the road, which means, are people going to be aware of this, right? And is it going to be successful? So looking here, like the fifth bullet down is marketing, and up above it says vendor will provide the turnkey solution. So I guess the first question is this one vendor or is this multiple vendors? And what I kind of struggle with there, like assuming it's one vendor, are they, if they're good at operating vehicles, are they really good at marketing, or are we doing the marketing? And it could just be the way that this is worded.
Sure.
But big picture, that's my concern, and some of the use cases that you kind of mentioned. So if someone's in the western part of Hollywood and they can go 3 miles, how does that turn into less cars on the road and less congestion? I mean, is it they're linking to a different transportation solution and they're going to get on a bus and go further? Because I see where a lot of the traffic really arises is people trying to get further. So, you know, I just get concerned that this is not going to get fully picked up, right? We have an issue here with adoption around anything that's viewed as public transit. It shouldn't be that way. We need to change the narrative and change how it's viewed. So maybe this would be a cool way to kind of do that. But in order to do that, the marketing has to be right. We have to get people to use it and leave their cars at home, or else it's not really.
I agree. So I think addressing the congestion point, in terms of our MAP goals, I would say this addresses the goal of connectivity first and foremost. You know, congestion probably secondary. You know, the idea here is to be able to get these folks either to transit or to be able to replace some of the local trips they have. One of the some of my conversations with folks who have used microtransit in other places, and when I had some conversations, I went to LA and I went on Metro Micro, their system, and they had a lot of folks using their microtransit system to be able to go to the grocery store, because it's easier to get your groceries and have some bags and bring it on a smaller shuttle than to carry all your bags on a large transit bus, right? It's just inconvenient to do so. And so what a lot of folks are doing right now in Broward County, we've heard this, for folks need to go grocery shopping or do some of those local trips like that, they'll actually take a taxi to go there in a single occupancy vehicle, to be able to get to those trips. This actually allows them the ability to use a microtransit solution to be able to conveniently make those trips. So from that perspective, we do see that by pooling more trips together, you are reducing congestion, but the primary goal this is trying to solve of the MAP goals would be the critical connectivity from these areas across their communities and to the connections to the transit system. In terms of marketing, we have kind of a two-path system on the marketing, so follow me if you would. So we have a separate general planning consulting contract that's been in place now for about 8 months. That contract has a number of vendors, including CBEs, and there's a 30% CBE goal on that procurement. And so we have the ability to tap into that contract to help us create the framework for the monitoring and performance management of this. We're also going to be using that to create the marketing strategy. So they're going to help us. What is the brand of this microtransit service? What will the vehicle wraps look like? How will we get the information out? What's our social media strategy could it be? What's the messaging could it be? And then what means of communication are we going to get that out? So our own contractor that we have on our CBE, on our general planning consulting contract is going to be helping us to create that particular strategy. And that CBE consultant, is a consultant that has worked extensively in the past with South Florida Commuter Services. So they're no stranger to transportation and marketing transportation solutions across the region. So they're going to be helping us to create the strategy. Our anticipation is that we'll use some of our own marketing leveraging to be able to get some of the information out, as we can on our buses. For instance, we have onboard information screens on all of our buses. We're going to have slides on there on every single bus running to explain and to promote this service. We'll push it through our eTransit Flash, push it through our social media, push it through all the various outlets we have as a transit agency. But then we're also looking to see what we can do beyond that. And it's going to be a lot, I think, connecting with these municipalities, connecting with the cities to help them get the message out to their residents. So we want to work, with City of Hillsborough Beach, with really ourselves for our municipal services district. We have the capacity to be able to do outreach with our own unincorporated area, and then the cities of West Park and the city of Hollywood as well. But we expect to have a very robust strategy, and these vehicles are going to be very visible on the road. And I'm hoping that the visibility of the vehicles on the road will start to spark some curiosity, right? Folks will be around, maybe they don't really use transit, they live in the area, and then you see this vehicle that has its own separate branding, never seen it before, and what is this? And then they look it up, and maybe they find out that they live in the zone, and they could use this on the daily to be able to go get their groceries or go to a local appointment across the system, and it's convenient where it will pick you up, on your street corner with no more than a 15-minute wait for free.
Thank you. And then kind of similar on the technology, is the thought that the potential operator would be developing this app as well? And do we think that this would be an entity coming in that has already done this, or they would be building this?
No, we expect to have an entity that already has extensive experience building microtransit dispatching apps across the country.
Ms. Love, did you have something?
Yes. Thank you. Great presentation. Appreciate it. Just needed to just understand the budget that's tied to the 2.75 million, specifically dealing with the, type of hard cost for this program. So I see vehicles, but what are we talking about? How many operators? So do you have the basis for the 2.75?
The way we're writing the RFP is we're actually not dictating the number of vehicles or the number of operators. But what we are dictating is the level of service. So we're going to require the operator to maintain no longer than a 15-minute wait in each service zone for trips. Now, that is really the standard. Now, how the operator decides to meet that, how many vehicles that the operator needs to do that, is going to be what we're going to be looking for when we receive the solicitations back from our RFP and how they plan to meet that particular goal. But we're not directly dictating the number of vehicles per service zone.
How did you come up with your number?
So we made an estimate of what we think the number of vehicles and hours we would need. So we took our span of service. So we know we're doing a 12-hour span of service, a minimum about 5 days a week. And we know we have 5 service zones. And we estimated, and said this could be different depending upon what we where we got, but we estimated roughly 2 vehicles to 3 vehicles per service zone at any given time. And then that kind of extrapolated to get us to our cost. And we used the cost that we saw in a recent solicitation in Miami-Dade County for Miami-Dade Public Transportation and Public Works, which was around $50 per revenue hour. We escalated that, and they have a very similar contract right now working turnkey with a company called VIA that's going very well down there.
And what was the vision for the dedicated call center? What does that look like?
I'm sorry.
Dedicated call center?
Oh, the call center is a requirement for us to meet all of our ADA requirements. So we have to have some sort of call center. We don't anticipate this being like a large customer service call center. We anticipate that the operator is going to have a couple dedicated positions available to answer phones at any given time, to be able to manually input information into the dispatching system, to be able to provide those linkages and trips to folks who don't have access to the smartphone to request a ride.
So that's from the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. time frame, and I think you said an hour before and an hour
Yes.
after?
Yes.
So you're talking from a staffing and equipment, those kind
Correct. So they have to provide everything needed to be able to operate that call center operation. But as I mentioned, this isn't going to be a large call center of operation, but they do have to provide a call center of folks who do not have access to cell phones, or smartphones or technology. They have to be beneficiaries of the system, and they will be through that call center option.
Whose role in the county will be to look at this whole thing from an accountability performance perspective? Who does that?
Sure. So we were planning on doing that through Broward County Transit and making reports available publicly as we go on through the process. I mentioned that our general planning consultant is going to help us to create a framework and a benchmarking plan for how we should be measuring up and get the performance measures for each one of these service zones. And we've got to be monitoring these service zones extensively as it rolls out. We do expect, though, that as with any transit service, usually there's about a 6 to 8 month ramp up. So it takes some time to get folks to know the service is available, it's in their neighborhood, getting the marketing out. So it's going to take a little bit of time for it to ramp up. But at the point in which we get, to, that kind of place, once we can feel the information's out there, we're going to be monitoring it extensively. So if we have to, this is a pilot, and so if we have to make changes, if we have to change the service areas, if we find out that one community really needs service Thursday through Tuesday, 5 days a week, as opposed to Monday through Friday, or something of that nature, we want to be able to provide these span and days of service that are going to be going to generate the most amount of ridership. We really want this to be successful, and we want to have the flexibility. And the reason why you have the word pilot in there is because you have that flexibility. We want to be able to be reactive to the public as we're getting information going on. Another piece of the marketing and kind of benchmarking I didn't mention is that we are going to be doing surveys throughout the process of the passengers on there. We're also going to want to get customer testimonials. So we're going to go out there and talk to the folks who are riding it and find out what they like about it, what they don't like about it, get those testimonials, and if it's had a positive improvement on their life, we want to hear that, and we want to be able to market that as a part of this program.
Sitting here listening to you, I've been curious about how this will impact Uber and Lyft. I mean, I know it's free, so certainly it will be adverse for them, but I was just wondering. How many of these people actually use that service currently, and those services currently, and how it might impact that as a business? But listen, free for our residents, great.
Exactly.
Thanks for living up to your promises.
No, you're welcome. I think, Uber and Lyft will take you anywhere, right? If you want to take a 50-mile trip on Uber, they might take you that 50-mile trip. This is going to be very isolated in those service zones during that certain span of operation. So outside that span, or if they want to take a direct trip greater than that service zone, then Uber still remains an option for folks to be able to travel around the county.
So I still I'm not sure of the response to who overall will be looking at this program from the county side. I understand the contract and their responsibilities. Is this this is a new program, a new scope? So who on your staff, because I would assume people are doing other things now, so who would be responsible for the compliance part of this, monitoring the performance of the contractor? Who is responsible for that?
We have a section within Service and Strategic Planning Division at Broward County Transit, and we have a position we're currently hiring for, a mobility administrator. Okay, and that mobility administrator will be the primary person responsible for monitoring this contract as time goes through, and being the direct contact between the county and the vendor to ensure that the vendor is meeting all their obligations under the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent job. Thank you.
I have something. So I did the math, okay? And I took the $13 and divided it into $2.75 million. And then I took 5-day weeks and I divided that. And then I took 5 zones and I divided that. And it comes out to over a 12-hour day, 13 passengers per hour. Did I get the math right?
No, because you have multiple vehicles.
No, I get that. So if you have multiple vehicles and they're all working, and in that zone, potentially you could go up to 13 passengers an hour.
Correct.
Okay. So then this is a zone where we were getting 1 passenger an hour on a community shuttle.
3 to 5 is what we were getting prior.
3 to 5, okay. All right, so then this is going to be hopefully a more attractive way of getting people into it, and then you're hitting 13, which is a home run in terms of community shuttle per hour, right? So, okay, so that's kind of where we are. Okay, we're trying to get 13 passengers in a zone per hour. It seems, I think it's ambitious, but it's a pilot. And then the other thing that concerns me is and it's kind of in line with what Ms. Love is talking about.
Sure.
That when you get to 13,750,000 over 5 years, and we don't hit some of these these milestones, like the 13 passengers per hour. Now we're doing 6 passengers per hour, but we've got a contract that's got us at 2.75 million. Is the value there, and can we pare it down, or is there a way to relook at it on an annual basis so we don't, just to, the audit, the performance audit, to look at it on an annual basis and make sure that we're not spending more than $13 per rider, because we're only getting 6 riders an hour, now it's costing us twice as much per rider.
Sure. So if we don't have, based upon pilot programs and the conversations I've had across the country with folks who have implemented microtransit services for a turnkey solution, if you do not offer a vendor a minimum of a 3-year contract, your rates are going to be absolutely astronomical.
Okay.
So you're talking, so you might only have a contract for a year, but instead of being $40 or $50 an hour, you might be looking at a contract rate that comes back to us at $80 an hour plus, because they are making the upfront investment in the vehicles.
Yeah, but we don't know what those vehicles are, because you told Ms. Love that we don't know how many vehicles they are. So we don't know how many vehicles we're talking about. And that's what confounds me a little bit.
I guess we have an idea, right, an estimate, but we didn't want to dictate in the procurement the number of vehicles. We wanted to dictate the service levels. Because ultimately, the goal we're trying to get to is to ensure that everyone in the community in these zones is able to get a trip in a 15-minute wait time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of leaving that on the reason why this is an RFP instead of a bid is because we don't fully know every nook and cranny in detail. We want these different vendors to come to us with solutions and how they're going to meet these objectives. So we have an idea in the back of our mind that we know 2 to 3 vehicles per zone. And we expect the vehicles to be probably traditional passenger minivans, maybe something a little bit more elegant than that with some additional features on it. There's going to have to be some vehicles that have ADA, that have wheelchair capabilities, because we actually have to maintain the same level of service for folks who require wheelchair boardings as we do for people who don't require wheelchair boardings. That actually reduces the capacity of some of the vehicles to be able to provide that wheelchair space on the vehicle. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but we're looking through the pilot program that we're going to have 3 years, and we're going to be working with the community to try to adjust this program as necessary. If we are not meeting those benchmarks, we want to meet those benchmarks. So we'll make adjustments as time goes on. If we get to the point of 3 years and it's looking like this isn't going, we do not have to execute year 4 or year 5.
Okay, that was going to be my next question, because maybe we have a buyout or something that's cheaper than continuing forward for 2 more years if the 3 years doesn't prove itself. And one last question. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to
Okay,
piggyback
go
on
ahead.
what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm hoping that the 15-minute wait time is not the only variable that's being measured, because I'm concerned about the uncontrolled variable of people actually going on
Oh, no,
taking the
of
ride,
course.
right? Because if we're trying to hit 13, how are they going to control or influence people? You can market, but sometimes people still don't buy, right? So I am concerned a little bit about that.
That's-
I would like to know, what are the other markers that you are measuring them by, other than just 15-minute ridership? Wait time.
Ridership is always the #1 performance metric we measure in the transit industry. So, I didn't mention ridership probably because for me it's a given in the industry, right? I don't have a choice. Ridership is our #1 performance benchmark of how we are doing and how successful our services are within the community. So ridership as a whole, ridership as measured per passengers per hour, ridership measured in terms of subsidy per passenger, all these various measures and performance metrics that relate to passenger efficiency are absolutely going to be a part of the benchmarking and monitoring process.
Are we holding them to a number? The 15 minutes, that's clear. What's the measure for ridership daily? Maybe not necessarily per.
We're going to be creating that performance benchmarking plan, and we don't want to hold the vendor to the ridership. We control the service zones. It's our service that we are dictating where the service goes. So if the service is not meeting the expectation, it's not really the fault of the vendor. It's the fault of us in our planning process and being able to make those adjustments as needed through time goes on. So we want to be able to make those adjustments and be reflective.
It could be fault of marketing too, because depending on who you get as your marketer for those demographics will really impact participation,
All of it.
you know? I would recommend getting churches and synagogues and all of those religious groups on board.
Absolutely.
Grassroots strategies.
Okay, so,
Absolutely.
so let me get back to, so then we got so I did it at max efficiency,
Yeah,
right?
gotcha.
So we know we can't hit max efficiency, and she's right, that the likelihood is it's going to be you that determines it, and then I would like to know what our target is. So if 13 is max efficiency, is it 6 an hour per zone? That would be an interesting thing to know, so then at some point in 3 years, we can measure the performance because we're going into this without a target ridership per hour, right? That's how
Right.
we do it all, right?
Right.
So that, and then the other thing that I think, you think of Hillsborough Beach, and I think of maybe there's condos there and stuff, and there's folks that, some of them are, the age group might want to get to the hospital or something.
Right, right.
I'm just kind of guessing, because I don't know much about Hillsborough Beach. But you got a radius, half of which is going into the ocean, right? And the other half is heading mostly west, right? West, north, and south. And there might be a hospital. So why wouldn't we be more flexible on that radius and create more of a rectangle or something that starts at a major street and goes to another?
Oh, we have.
Okay, so
We
you're
have.
doing it that way.
We're not using as the crow flies, just buffer zones to determine
Okay,
the zones.
okay.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Okay,
not.
yeah, 'cause
We
there could
follow
be
the
those-
geography and the street grid.
Perfect. Okay, that's just a question I had for you.
Yeah, so that's-
So, you know, for us to do a performance audit, and I would want to do one at the end of 3 years, that's what I would like, is to know what the goal is on a per hour basis.
In fact, I was thinking in terms of perhaps amending it to require coming back to the board at the end of 3 years with that performance audit before we grant the final 2 years.
Can we get some ongoing monitoring? I don't want to wait till 3 years. How would we make any corrections? I mean, why can't we get an annual update as to how they're doing? That way, if we can suggest something, there's more revenue that's needed, I mean, I wouldn't want to wait.
I have no objections to coming back and giving presentations on how this program rolls out as we go out through this process. Tim, did you want to?
Yeah. That may create some contract issues in terms of the investment that the vendor is providing, which is going to be subject to an annual termination period if we determine that the performance is not meeting our objective. That's why I suggested 3 years.
Well, I mean, it's evaluating where they are and discussing opportunities for us to assist in some way. Or, you know, what if more revenue is needed? I don't know, but I don't want to wait until the end of 3 years and then we're like, oh my God, it's been a failure.
Yeah.
right?
I don't disagree with you, and I don't think it's impossible for you to give us performance measures on an annual basis. We know we're not going to kill the deal because it's a 3-year contract, but at the end of the day, it's just like you said, the hours and the passengers per hour is driven by the program and not by the vendor. So potentially, we could come up with ideas that could improve it in year 1 so that it doesn't allow it to die in year 3. So, but my goal would be to know what the target is, and so that we can make a decision later as to whether or not it's performing, because, and I hope it does perform, because I think it's a valuable service that you're going to be providing.
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
I'm sorry. Hi.
Oh, yes.
Hi. Tim Garling, Deputy General Manager of Broward County Transit. Now, I just want to emphasize that, we'll come back on an annual basis and assess the performance. I do think you got to kind of think about this as we have to understand what the demand is and try to meet the demand, right? And if it's lagging, are there things we can do? Are there adjustments we can make? And that absolutely takes annual monitoring, and that's the value of the pilot. So I think coming back here, looking at it, and the demand could be different in each of these zones, so it's understanding the market, because I think there's a fundamental here. People will use transit that serves them, right? That's going to be the fundamental, and it could be different in each of these areas. So that's what the value of the pilot is. It gives us a chance for an adjustment period to make some changes for days or hours, et cetera. So we certainly will be coming back.
And honestly, if you market it right, this is gonna kill it. Sorry, but it's too easy. It's like on-demand, free transit. So and you go get groceries, it's gonna kill it. We just gotta make sure everybody knows about it, so.
And Mr. Chair, I think too, I mean, the opportunity with the annual updates is that maybe we'll spur other zones, right? Maybe there are other zones that you may want to look at. So at least at the end of 3 years, you may say, well, there are 2 other zones that we want to look at because this has been going so great, right?
All right, so, talked about it. We need a motion.
Mr. Chair, we had both the Broward County Transit initiatives together in one motion. If you'd like to get through the next one?
Yeah, sure,
Is that
that would be
okay?
great. Sure.
All right, so we have action item 3 up next.
So I'm still here. All right. So this is the second of our kind of innovative pilot programs that we want to roll out. So this one involves providing connectivity to folks who work overnight shifts after Broward County Transit services have suspended for the evening. And to provide them a flexible mobility option to get those late shift workers, from their homes to their place of employment. So the Broward County Transit system starts to ramp down services for the evening, typically around 10 o'clock at night. We do have some routes that go all the way past midnight, but system-wide, you start to ramp down around 10 o'clock. In the mornings, it's kind of the same thing. We have some routes that have service pulling out and going in the morning as 4:30, 4:50 a.m., in the 5 o'clock hour, but we really don't get fully ramped up to 6 a.m. So that leaves that span of service in the middle of the evening where folks who are reliant upon transit has no ability to get to work, and limits folks' employment opportunities for overnight work. When we first started looking at this, we did some research, and our minds initially went to, we need to provide overnight connectivity for the tourist industries on the coast, our hospitality industries, our hotel workers, our restaurant workers, food service, bars, things of that nature. As we started doing more research, we really realized that we have a whole lot more late night shift workers than just in those industries. We have a lot more jobs starting to crop up in warehousing logistics and warehousing logistics and kind of those Amazon type warehousing type jobs that require overnight employment. We have folks that do overnight call centers. We have folks who work in access control and security at night, and we have folks in healthcare. And so we really wanted to find a solution that was not only tailored to the immediate coastal areas of where the complex of our hospitality industry is, but creating a pilot program that would be all-encompassing countywide. And that's what kind of led us to this solution versus some other solutions, versus, let's say, a shuttle solution or a microtransit solution. We wanted to have a county-wide implementation and provide that connectivity and access late night. So how we'd like to do this is we'd like to use an existing contract we have with a company called Cab Connect that runs, they're currently running a program in our paratransit division side where they provide subsidies for people who qualify to be able to hail a taxi to be able to get them to their destination, and they get a subsidy for that ride. So we want to do something very similar in this case, so that the concept is we would have folks who work overnight shifts be able to register and sign up with us. They have to verify that they have overnight employment. And then we would give them a Cab Connect card, a payment card, that has a certain number of vouchers they can use per week for taxi rides, or TNCs, because we actually are, TNCs are not excluded, but they have to be a part of the Cab Connect program. I'll get there in a second. But we have a whole list of taxi companies. Yellow Cab tends to predominantly, get most of the trips, but if you look on the list, there's a whole lot more than Yellow Cab. Most taxi providers in the county are able to accept this payment card. And the idea here is that we would provide eligible riders a $15 subsidy, per trip, up to 5 trips per week to get them either to or from home. We estimate that $15 will get them about 6 miles on a taxi with no traffic. You know, when we did some calculations, we found that to be pretty significant. Over about 50% of the county, their jobs are located less than 10 miles from where they live. So a lot of folks are going to be able to go a pretty far distance, 6 miles, you know, on the subsidy. Any amount of fare on a taxi beyond that $15 would be the responsibility of the person taking the taxi. So they would just pay for the amount in excess of the $15. So if it's less, you pay that. I will mention we are requiring a $2 trip per fee as well. So in order to get the $15 subsidy, you essentially have to first pay the equivalent of a 1 bus ride on our system. So a 1 bus trip right now costs $2. So you would have to pay $2, and then you get the $15 subsidy to be able to complete your taxi trip to get you to and from your work or your home. The cards are going to be configured, you know, so that folks cannot use this system to joyride around the county at night to other activities. It's going to be locked to their registered employment destination or origin. So if their employee's address is not either the origin or the destination of the trip when using this card, it's going to reject the subsidy. It's going to be only used for folks to be able to get to work, which is why we use Late Shift Connect as the name of the program to be able to make that to be able to make those connections. As I mentioned before, it's going to be 5 days per week they can use this. That provides up to a $300 subsidy per month. If you were to use it if you use all 5 trips per week and all month long and you use the full subsidy, it's a maximum of $300 of benefit, you know, towards taxi or TNC. So that's a substantial savings for folks. So we really think this is going to increase people's accessibility and access to jobs. Another component of this, when we were kind of looking across the country at solutions, we think that this is really going to increase the ability of folks and comfort of folks to be able to access some of this late night employment. We know there's a lot of folks out there who would not be comfortable waiting on a street corner for a bus at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, this service has the benefit of you hailing and using whatever taxi company you want to get from your home directly to your place of employment safely without having to stand out on the street. You know, so that's something that we saw as a benefit, and in a lot of the literature reading, you know, there are some barriers. You know, we'd love to be able to get to a point where we can make some sort of late owl transit service work. That certainly has its place in the transit suite of options. But we think this is a really good one for kind of a start, test case, and pilot program to be able to get folks, you know, to and from their place of employment. Very similar to the last program I mentioned. We're using our general planning consulting contract to provide monitoring and benchmarking, you know, for this particular initiative. So the exact same kind of processes we're going through for microtransit, this is actually on the same work authorization. You know, so they're going to be providing what the benchmarking is, what is the monitoring of this, what are the origins and destinations people are going to. We might find out through the data that we have the same origins and destinations popping up time over time over time, and then maybe we look at this and say, well, you know what, we actually can do a late night shuttle route or a late night flexible shuttle route or some sort of other option, you know, using other transit modes. So we really want to receive that data as time goes on for the origins and destinations. We're going to be making adjustments to this based on customer feedback. Same thing as with the microtransit. We want to do surveys to the customers who are using it. We want to do customer testimonials. We want to be able to do some focus groups. We want to get out there and see how this service will have an impact on people's lives. Marketing is going to be a huge component of this one because we're going to have to really get down into the grassroots and let people know that this is available. You know, so the marketing strategy for this is we'll of course be working with the large organizations like South Florida Commuter Services and the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance and the big names, but we also know we're going to have to target the smaller level, right? We're going to have to go down and look at individual municipal chambers of commerce and areas chambers of commerce to get the word out there. We also want to get the word out to our transit riders. A lot of these folks who don't have access to get to work late at night use our services during the day when they're available. You know, so we're going to be doing a lot of marketing on board our buses and to our passengers to let them know, hey, if you're looking to provide connectivity to your job late at night, here you go. You have that option. You know, really the goal is, you know, to be able to provide people the comfort. So I don't know if you've seen this on job applications. There's this dreaded question of, do you have reliable transportation to work? It's kind of a coded question, right, on what they're really asking you. You know, and so we want people to be able to check, yes, they have a reliable mode of transportation to work, even in the overnight hours, and this program would allow them to do that.
You got anybody?
You tell me.
You want to go for, oh, let's let,
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Kelly?
Go ahead.
We haven't heard from her today.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is, in terms of the pilots, much easier for me to get my head around, in terms of, I definitely would like to say I support this idea. And the card sounds very much like what I use, the writer's choice
It's
thing
the-
for paratransit.
It's the exact same program, except it will be a different card. It will be a parallel program on the same contract, so it works the exact same way.
So my question is, basically, you are envisioning helping late shift workers with a 5-day work week, right? 5 days a week, and but the subsidy, it says maximum of 5 trips per week. Are those round trips?
Those are one-way trips. When we did some research on this, what we discovered is a lot of the way the shift times work, you can actually use transit to either get to work or to get from work within the span. There were very few jobs where you would have to have a round trip, where you couldn't use transit on one side or the other of the span.
But getting from home to work late night and from work back home, why wouldn't it be 10 trips a week instead of 5? The subsidy.
As I said, we looked at that, and initially, when we did the research, a lot of folks, let's say you have to be at work, at 10 o'clock, and then you get off work 8 hours later. You could take BCT services to get to work by 10 o'clock, but then the way home, you wouldn't have any way to go home. So then you would use this transit service. Conversely, if you had to be at work at midnight, you wouldn't be able to do that. But 8 hours later would be 8 o'clock in the morning, and our services are fully running by that time. So the idea would be that, you could use it for one of the 2 trips, either going to work or from work. But our span of service at the county is wide enough, so that we could accommodate one side of that trip with traditional public transit.
But this is door to door.
Correct.
BCT is not
That's correct.
door to door. So essentially what's happening here is that a person needs to only use it either to get to or back from work. And I'm just suggesting that, I would strongly encourage you to make it round trip. I really would.
Sure. We are open to, for instance, it's 5 trips per week. If you don't work 5 days per week, if you work less than that, and you wanted to use your 5 trips one day for a round trip, you could use 2 of those trips to do so. So we have that flexibility built in. But again, this is a pilot program. So the idea, again, is that we can modify these criteria as time goes on, and we want to get the customer feedback and find out, because we might find out that our assumption is completely wrong, right? And that you need to provide a greater number of trips to be able to get people to and from. But our initial analysis suggests that most folks will have the ability to use BCT services on either one end or either front end to or the back end from their place of employment.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bennett?
Yes. What's your name?
Nicholas,
Nicholas. You're doing an excellent job.
thank you.
So I'm curious about share ridership, the opportunity where you have multiple, individuals working for the same company, getting off at the same time. The opportunity for them to perhaps not even having to subsidize any aspect of their ride, because both of them, it's like a bonus ride. I don't know. They do that with Lyft and all the time. If you share the ride, then it costs you less, essentially, and that would give them the ability to not have to pay anything. So I'm curious to know whether or not you've done any work on that. And then the other piece is marketing this opportunity to employers, because we hear it all the time that there's this crisis, shortage of workforce, and so I'm just thinking, even when they're announcing job opportunities, that they could co-partner with us essentially, and this gives greater visibility for the work that we're doing. So I want them to be able to say that they have this program as part of an employee, benefit, through the county. I'm just wondering if there's a way to do that. Maybe there's some conflict, but for employers to also use this as a way to engage employees.
Yep.
And to market it to their employees.
So in terms of shared rides, there actually already exists a program through South Florida Commuter Services that provides for van pools. So folks right now could contact South Florida Commuter Services and get a van pool set up. So if you have a lot of people going to work at the same time and they live in a certain geographic area, they can actually sign up right now and they'll provide a vehicle and at a less cost to be able to have them run their own van pool program to get to and from. So that type of service already exists. In terms of shared service via taxis, that's something we haven't fully looked into, only because this particular service is we don't have, the way the Cab Connect system works, we actually don't have direct contracts with any of the taxi providers, or TNCs. We have a contract with the payment provider that provides the card that you can then use to access any of the companies that are on the network. But moving forward, we can certainly look at other strategies, that involve, pooled rides or possibly, having a contract that's more direct with a provider or a taxi or a TNC provider to be able to provide some pooled trips. And then sorry, I missed the last question about getting out to the businesses. 100% agreed. We want to tackle this from both sides. We want to be able to let our passengers know who currently ride transit that you have this option late at night now. That doesn't exist currently. But we also want to engage employers directly so that they're aware of it and so they can start advertising the service to their employers, or they have people coming on board who might be hesitant of working overnight hours, that this option is available to them.
Mr. Allen.
We have so many, or will have so many service options for people to get transportation through mass transit. Do we have a program in place where we can sit down either on a one-on-one basis or with a group of employees and provide individualized counseling to help them design how they're going to access the various options that they will have in front of them to decide what is best, either through employment issues, new company coming in, or, they're going through a rehiring process, to counsel individuals on what are your options to having a car. And, we will design a trip for you. Take this bus to here, or this community shuttle to here, to connect to a bus, to connect to a shared ride, or whatever. Do we have that capability in mass transit?
It's really interesting. So we have a customer call center, obviously. Anyone can call, whether it's an employer or whether it's a customer, in terms of, and they're familiar with all our suites of services, right? And every level of service we provide, so they can provide some information on, how you would get from one place to the next place, at any time during the day, so they have that capability. But I think you do raise a point of us needing to provide additional materials as we start to roll out these new services to make sure people are aware of all these various options, that not just the people know, also employers know it, and that we provide feedback for folks to be able to quickly be able to discern, and create a trip for them that's convenient.
I think that program needs to be expanded.
Sure.
Do you want to, Susan?
I'm just saying that program seems to have fit that requirement, but it needs to be publicized.
Yeah.
It needs to be able to work through the employers, saying, you complain that people can't get to work or they can't get home. We can come in there and design transit plans for each of your employees, or even, paratransit, what have you.
So, I have a hard time tying these two together, the item 2 and item 3. And the reason why is, in item 2, we're providing a vehicle, whether it's through a vendor or not, we're providing a vehicle and a program and a system that's going to move people, so there's a mobility aspect to it. In number 3, I almost feel like we're doing the job of, we're creating a program that it's paying for the employers when the employers should be the ones paying this. This is my opinion. I think that a hotel should be paying, instead of, they should be paying everybody $150 a month more, okay? And I don't know why it's our job, or why it's the Surtax program's job, to pay for these employees that, I want these employees to have access, so I'm not trying to be mean to the employee. I think the employer needs to be ponying up the dough. I do. And so I just feel like it's like we're doing something, and let's call it what it is. We're subsidizing the salaries of these folks so that they can get to work and back. And let's remember too, because I'm kind of in the restaurant business too. We're dying for people, okay? So we're paying them more money now. We're competing with others, and the hourly wages, even in construction right now, I'm paying huge bucks for laborers, okay? Way beyond what we ever paid before. And they're getting more money. So I'm wondering why we're doing this. I'm wondering why this is a mobility program. And why the surtax has to, and does it even meet the surtax, the ordinance?
So both of these programs qualify as on-demand transportation services under 212055 Florida statutes. So the statute provides for roads, bridges, and transit. And this is an on-demand transportation services. So both of these, one being the first one being a vendor that's providing rides on demand, and the other being the customer selecting the on-demand service provider. They're both on-demand service. And it is permissible under 212055 Florida statutes.
So, that's my issue, that's my personal, I just have a
His mic.
philosophical.
Mr. Chair, please use your mic.
This is my issue, and I have a philosophical problem with subsidizing for where the employer should probably be the one that's paying it. And it's fallen on the back. So the sales tax, we all pay sales tax. And granted, the tourists are paying some of it. So yeah, restaurant goers and hospitality goers, guests are paying for a portion of it. But so are we. So are a lot of people in this county paying for it, just citizens of this county. And so we are subsidizing basically the salaries of those employees, and that's my issue. And that's why I want to vote on both issues, and I have a problem with number 3.
So I'm going to chime in a little bit. I hear what you're saying, but I don't know that the people who are going to use this service can, in a very strenuous way, lobby their employers to pony up that $150, right, a month. And so what excites me about this, it allows us to deliver something to that demographic of people who are impoverished, for lack of a better word, underserved communities, who are also taxpayers. And so they may not see some of the other projects that we have to offer, but it's a way for us to say, you know what, we want to do something a little significant for you, and let's see how it works. We don't know that if it's going to work, right? And maybe it's that we morph the micro transit program into this cab thing. I think it's the cab drivers benefits from this, right? It does
Absolutely.
provide some the cab companies do.
Local companies.
The cab companies do. You know, I hear your point, but
I kind of like your point where you're carpooling the thing together.
Right.
Okay, or let's.
So it reduces the cost. I'm just trying to find ways to reduce this price tag. If we could carpool, you know, other employees at a particular site where we're picking them up, and then, you know, there's a share ridership. They're already exposed to each other, so it would be okay, you know.
Actually, if I may, when we first started looking at solutions for late night service, the first thing we looked at was, you know, could we provide traditional late night bus service? Could we provide an owl service? You know, that's kind of, you know, the first line solution for overnight. Could we run a certain network of our bus routes late at night? And we found that we just don't have the density of origins and destinations late at night to do that.
Right.
You know, so this kind of became, you know, and microtransit could have some merit here, but again, you're only limited to those 3-mile trips. So if you have an overnight commute, and you have to go, from Plantation and you need to get out to the hospitality area on the beach, you can't do that with microtransit, but you can do that through this program. So we looked at those various options. We think this is the best option for the current time. However, as we receive the data, if we start to see clustering of those origin and destination points to the same employers, to the same areas, I think then we have some justification to go back and look at, maybe we could do a route here or some sort of other pooled or shared mobility option for the folks who have these origins and these destinations to be able to reduce the cost. So we are going to be analyzing the data as we move forward.
Or you could morph a component of the microtransit program to do exactly that, right? Because now you have the bus, it has the capacity, because it seats more than just 1 or 2 people. And, we're not stuck where the micro has to be 3 miles. You have the ability to extend it to 6 or 10 at nighttime. And it would probably create greater efficiency in the long run in terms of ridership.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Are they allowed to do Uber too?
So you're allowed to go with anyone who is on the Cab Connect payment system, because Cab Connect really provides a card. So it's kind of like Visa or MasterCard, right? The cab companies have to be able to accept a Cab Connect payment card. Right now, we are in conversations with Uber. They're very interested in adding it, and they're currently in the process of trying to become a member of that program. So we anticipate that by the time this program fully rolls out, you'll have the option of any of these local taxi companies that are currently on the list of providers, and or Uber to make the trip.
Is there any way we could get a partnership going here with businesses? It's just bothering me a little bit that, anyway, okay. So, is there any other questions? Okay.
Is it possible to morph the microtransit program a little bit? Into something that-
Your
You
microphone's
gotta hit
not
your
on.
microphone.
Sorry. Is it possible, I think I'm talking loud without the microphone, but is it possible to morph a component of the microtransit? Because we're gonna invest in these vehicles anyway. Some of them are likely to be underutilized on some days, right? Is it possible that could be utilized?
It would be difficult because when you start to have trips greater than 3 miles, so let's say you even do have that clustering of trips, or we find that there's some. First of all, we don't even know where the clusters of trips are right now. We know the trips are very dispersed, but we don't know who the actual users are going to be of the system. However, when you have those trips longer than 3 miles, if you start having a microtransit or a shuttle vehicle have to provide a trip from, let's say, Plantation or Weston all the way out to the beach, and then someone else requests a trip late at night, for another area, their wait time can be 30, 40 an hour, and that's not going to get them to work on time, reliably, for that employer. And so you end up with a lot of issues with, can you do it? Yes. Could you do it where they can get to work reliably on time? Probably not, using that type of mode.
Sorry to ask so many questions. How much again is it per person? It's $150 a month divided by
It's up to $15 per trip, 5 trips per week.
$15 per
So it's up to $300 per month that's only if you have the maximum subsidy. So if your trip is shorter and you don't use all $15, your trip might only be $6. And so then it's $6 instead of $15.
So they can't use more than the allotted days?
Correct.
I got you. So then it's
Correct.
probably going to be less than that.
Absolutely.
And it's going to cost the same amount of money as the microtransit.
That's kind of what we're
You're
getting
just
to.
trying to figure out
That's
a
what
way
we're
to
trying
put
to. That's exactly what we're trying to get
people on wheels
to.
for less money.
That's
got
right.
it. Okay, all right. I'm
Your
fine.
microphone's not on. Dr. Kelly, your microphone. Because it's recording, so we need to speak in the microphone so that the recording can pick up the comments.
Is that
Thank you.
working? Yes. I'm sorry. So, but the true cost to the rider, or in this number 3, is $4, because
Two-
they have to trip it.
Yeah, it would be two-
too.
It's
What's
$2. They have to pay a kind of a $2 copay, which is the cost of a one-ride BCT pass. So you pay $2, towards the fare, and then you receive the $15 subsidy.
So
per trip.
it really isn't free to the rider.
Correct. It is not.
Number
This
one.
program is not free to the rider. This would require a $2 copay,
Per trip.
equivalent to a one ride pass on BCT.
Right, and then I share Chairman Hooper's concern that that employers aren't kicking in anything here and get basically all of the marketing benefit and the employing or recruiting of employees benefit. So it would be nice if we could explore some way to get them to kick in at the outset, something.
And one other question. How do we determine that the person is needy? Like, what if somebody's like the GM of a hotel, okay, and he's making $200,000 a year, and he lives in Weston, or she, and they're getting into a cab? How do we, is there an income level or something?
We're going to ask them to self-certify on the application that they do not have any other means to get to and from their place of employment overnight.
Because I have a friend who's rich that doesn't own a car, okay, so he has no other way to do it, okay? I mean, I don't think he would ever do it, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Self-certify based on,
They're going to have a question. They're going to have to answer yes to a question. Do you or do you not have a means to get to work during these hours? If you do not have a means to get to work during those hours, then you can provide evidence that you actually work an overnight shift. So it's kind of two parts. You have to prove you actually work that overnight shift hours in that span and you need the service. But then second, you also have to certify that you do not have any other means to be able to make that trip. Then you qualify for the program.
and it's not based on income?
No, it's not based on income.
I'm surprised.
I'm trying to follow here. The other purpose of the program is efficiency in traffic reducing. So they have a car, but they would prefer to use this. You're saying that would not be available to them?
That would not be available to them. Because if you have a
But
car,
if you
then you
wanna
have another
have a-
means to go.
Reduce the number of cars out there is to provide an alternate to the car.
This is using taxis and TNC vehicles, so it's still going to be the same car on the road. This particular program, the Late Night Connect, is not pulling riders together. So it's still just a single occupancy vehicle or lower occupancy vehicle to get people
But
to and from the trip.
that cab is going to be out there on the street anyway, whether they're carrying a passenger or not. Your car is going to sit in your garage or your driveway.
True, to that point, you're
If you
correct.
don't,
Yeah.
need to take your car.
Yep, that's true.
I take it congestion wouldn't be such an issue at night, right?
Right. This is first and foremost, this is providing connectivity to people who do not have connectivity to their jobs or employment late at night.
So, I'm gonna go with it. Let's call the motion on both of them, please.
If I may,
Oh, yeah.
we need to clarify the motion. Am I? Okay.
Yeah, but
It's-
somebody's gotta make it, right?
No, I would like to make it and just have someone so move it, because it's.
It's good enough.
All right, thank you. It's motion to approve as eligible pursuant to 212055 Florida statutes, the project and proposed expenditures in the not-to-exceed amount of $2.7 million per year for up to 5 years for the Broward County Transportation Department's Community Microtransit Pilot Program.
So move.
Second.
Where are we here? We got
I
a
said so
moved.
move.
We have a second?
And Thea.
Yeah, second.
Are you seconded, Mr. Frazier? Do we have any comments?
Yeah, We don't need to have an amendment, I believe, but with the understanding that before the optional years of 4 and 5, that this board will have the opportunity to review the performance of the program.
Absolutely.
I don't think it needs to be amended in there, but that's the understanding that we have.
Perfect.
I want to add an amendment, and you guys can vote it down if you want to, okay? Here's my amendment, all right? On number 3.
This was just the microtransit. We'll
Oh, we're
take-
doing one at a time?
Yes,
Good,
please.
okay, so.
This
I
was
don't
just
need
for
an amendment on this one.
the eligibility, statutory eligibility of the project and funding for microtransit, for the
Okay.
microtransit pilot.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any comments? Oh. Yeah.
No.
No other comments, though. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Okay, before we even go in there, before we make the motion, okay. I would like to add to this program. That when they certify, because you're basically swearing that you are that, which you don't have a car to get to work, and that you're working, what is it? You don't have a car to get to work, and
You don't have the means of travel to get to and from work, and that you work an overnight shift
That's right.
job.
And the third thing, that you can't afford to pay it yourself. That, I want something where they're saying that they need this, it's a thing, right? What is it that we could say? What is it that we could put in a certification that would assure us that a general manager or somebody who makes in excess of some amount?
Right,
that-
I think an income threshold.
Even if it's
could
just
be-
you certifying that this is something that without it, I could not get to work. Without this program, I could not get to work.
That's what we're looking for, exactly. Without this program, you could not get to work. That's the question that we want to answer. We want the applicants to answer and to certify.
And then whatever.
Why wouldn't you consider an income threshold?
There could be other reasons people
Yes.
can't drive.
What's that?
Okay.
Yes, there can be other reasons other than income that someone could not drive to and from work. You know, and so we want to make sure that we're being inclusive.
Okay.
Okay.
We don't ask anyone to certify their income to use public transportation.
That's true.
This is public
You want people to
transportation.
use
We
tran-
want people
Yeah,
to use
yeah.
public transportation.
All right.
Okay, are we ready? So it would be a motion to approve as statutory, as eligible pursuant to 212.055 Florida statutes, the project and expenditures in the not-to-exceed amount of $2 million a year for 5 years for the Broward County Transportation Department's Late Shift Connect pilot program.
So moved.
I second.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm excited for this.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. All right, who's got number 4?
If I could have
Public Works.
Mr. Huey come
Broadview.
forward.
Should I start? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Tony Hui, Broward County Public Works Department. I'm here today to ask for your consideration and approval for a new project. It's a road drainage project in the Broadview Park neighborhood, and it potentially carries some good news with it. So let me just describe it very briefly. The Broadview Park neighborhood is one of the counties is in the Broward County Municipal Service District. Its location of it is bounded by State Road 7 on the east, Turnpike to the west, 12th Street in the north, which turns into Peters, and then also on the south side is bound by essentially 595 that you know in that area there. It's a lower income neighborhood. And the road drainage from this neighborhood, essentially there is 3 outfalls that drain into the new river that's just runs parallel to 595. Over the last couple of years, we just have had significantly more road drainage issues in this neighborhood than we have in the past. It's probably due to a combination of reasons. It's probably due to the continued aging of the pipes that are in the ground. And then that area is also tidally influenced, so you know the tidal effects and climate change and you know certain level of sea rise probably has something to do with it, and it's probably a combination of both things. So over the last 2 years, we have had significantly more drainage on our roads than we have had in the past. You've seen some pictures of it. We have many more. These are just 2 typical pictures of it. So in terms of trying to resolve these issues of this neighborhood and be able to provide a reliable road network and transportation system for the residents, we actually submitted a grant for this project to improve the drainage of this neighborhood. And we submitted to the Florida Department of Economic Development. And the grant that we submitted was for a total estimated cost to improve the drainage for about $21.7 million. 21.7, with the request that DEO, Economic Opportunity, provides $16.7 million for the project, and the county, as our match, would provide $5 million as part of the match. So it's roughly just a little bit over 20% our match, somewhere in there. Since the application was submitted, we actually have had a number of very positive responses back from DEO. After our application was reviewed, it was shortlisted. We had interviews via video conference. We have had a virtual site visit with the team. And actually, this past Wednesday, our team had a field visit with the DEO team out in the field, went through the project so that they got to physically take a look at, some of the things that we're talking about and that type of thing. And everything so far has indicated that it would be it's very positive. But you guys know how these things go in terms of, so I don't want to oversell it, but there certainly is a very good potential. Their team really likes the technical aspects of this project. So the timing of it is a bit of issue, and that's why we kind of want to get the board's approval for an initial study, and then also to get our board's approval to get this thing started in the event that we get this grant. So what they have told us a couple of days ago was that they're planning to announce the award winners of this grant in late January, February of next year. And so the part of it is that there is going to be a tight time frame with the project. So what we would want to do is that when let's say, assuming that we're the recipients of this grant, is that we want to initiate a detailed planning study, because this is also concept that we have spoken with, as part of the grant application so far, is that we would, initiate this study. If it's, we estimated the study would be less than $500,000, but, somewhere in that range. We will get that started. Again, assuming that we get the grant, and then we'll get that started, and then we'll get on top of but we'll have to meet a pretty stringent timeline that they have. So this is the initial step. If you approve it, and then if our board approve it, conduct the study, we get the grant, we will come back to you at a later point for the remaining $4.5 million match for this project. So again, it's very positive outlook that we have at this point, but don't want to oversell it. And there's a potential, we'll have to just wait and see, but it's very positive so far. And so we're asking for your consideration for a new project, $500,000 for this initial study.
Mr. Allen.
The projects that we had, municipal projects, we ran across some projects, and I think Tamarack was one of those, that there was a roadway flooding issue, and we determined that there were parts of the project that were outside of the permitted roadway impact. In other words, they wanted to put pump stations or something like that in areas outside of that program, and we had said, no, you can't use the surtax for those programs.
So the issue involved a different municipality, and the project was found partially eligible. The municipality wanted a pump to install or replace a pump in a canal. And the criteria requires, so roadway drainage is permissible. Planning, the statute allows for planning, development, construction, operation, and maintenance of roads and bridges. So if the road is flooding, there's roadway drainage is a part of the construction of any roadway. And in this instance, the drainage is not functioning properly and the roads are flooding. So to redo the drainage and improve the road is permissible under the statute. The issue with the other, and that particular municipality and all of the municipalities have to follow the same criteria that the county follows, which is they have to measure the right from the middle of the road to a certain extent into the right of way, and provide drainage calculations and drainage improvements for the road that cover drainage on the public within that measurements of the public right-of-way are permissible. And so that particular municipality just has to provide a drainage analysis that reflects the amount of drainage or runoff from a public roadway, and the amount of funding that would be eligible would be the funding associated with the runoff, the drainage for the roads, public roads.
I hate to bring this up, but we've all read over the last couple of years, all of the issues relative to Fort Lauderdale and their storm drainage and water systems.
Sewer. Theirs is particularly sewer. In sewer, that type of infrastructure is not permissible under the statute.
Even if that sewage is flowing in over the road.
Right, because, the sewer system is not part of the roadway drainage system.
Okay.
So
Unless they have a
sewer
combined
infrastructure is
system.
not permissible. Utilities are not permissible. It's roadway drainage.
Oh, okay. And this project here does not extend beyond the boundaries of what is necessary for the drainage of the roadway.
Mr. Allen, we would treat ourselves the same way that we deal within other cities. We would, as part of this initial study that we'll be performing, we will also be doing an analysis to verify that the surtax portion, the payment from the surtax, will only be related to the road portion of it. So we treat ourselves the same way as anybody else.
Okay, and so we're gonna do 500 grand, which is gonna get us through the study, and it's gonna get you to the point where you can get the grant, right?
Well, okay, so just to clarify, because we just got new information from the DEO just a couple of days ago, they will announce the winners of the grant late January or February. So we obviously wouldn't have started the study by that point in time.
So you're gonna start the study after you get the
Yeah,
grant?
we're gonna study,
You
but.
just want it teed up so that you're ready to go. if you do.
Exactly, because there's going to be a final agreement that needs to be signed. You know,
Gotcha.
it'll be actually an agreement that'll be signed a couple months down the road, and then but we'll be teed up for that final
So the
agreement. to be signed.
sequencing is grant, spend the 500,000.
Right. Mhm.
Okay, so when we do this motion, I would want it to be contingent on the grant being approved before we spend 500,000. I know that's what we would do, but
Right.
we
So
should say it in the grant, in the motion.
what we're doing is reviewing for statutory eligibility. And so
Okay.
and in the event that, so that the project is eligible, and whether the funds, I guess, get used will depend upon what happens through that grant evaluation process. But for purposes of now, I guess we're just reviewing for statutory eligibility, and in the event that additional funds are needed, it would come back later, right?
Okay, all right. Motion?
Okay, so motion to approve as eligible pursuant to Section 212.055 Florida statutes, the project and expenditure in the amount of $500,000 for the Broward County Public Works Department to begin a Broadview Park drainage study to prepare for grant project funding.
I believe the request, though, Chair, was contingent upon the grant being awarded.
Right,
It's
that
eligible.
was my request,
Right.
but she said that that's not a request I can make.
Yeah, you can put it at the end of the motion, and
Okay.
the 500,000 is approved contingent upon the
I
grant
would
being
then
awarded.
let's add it to the end of the motion.
Okay, so a motion to approve as statutorily eligible the project and expenditures of $500,000 to the Broward County Public Works Department to begin the Broadview Park drainage study to prepare for grant funding, contingent upon. So the funds would be, so the recommendation to the county commission would be to allocate the funds contingent upon the grant award, the grant being awarded. That was the motion.
So moved.
Allison, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Let's go to number 5.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask if Mr. Coolman, Vice Chair Coolman is actually on the line. He did indicate that he was going to join virtually. Mr. Coolman, are you on the line? Okay, just checking.
Okay, so number 5, who's got that one?
Mr. Mahoney is going to come to the podium and present the Pat Salerno interchange.
Good morning. My name is Larry Mahoney. I'm with County Administration, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Pat Salerno Sawgrass Expressway interchange.
Sorry.
Okay. So we're here today to follow up on some other meetings that we had with you beginning back in 2020 in August, where we brought to you the proposal to construct a full interchange at Pat Salerno. So not only that it goes from the south as it does now, it'll also go to the north. At that time, we didn't have all of our funding needs in line, and we said we'd get back to you before the final funding. Back last January, we came to you for another agreement where we had a deadline to meet with Florida Turnpike Enterprise regarding the funding of the project, and they said they would give us another year to move forward if we were able to fund part of the design for the interchange to move forward. But we've now come to the point where it's at the end of the year again for us. And we have reached an agreement tentatively with all the city and also the Florida Turnpike Enterprise to move forward. So we're now at that point where we'll be asking for $29 million for funding that would be needed for the project to move forward with us. And I'll go through the project if you'd like a little bit more information. We've already spent $3 million of the $29 that we're asking for. This allows for the Pat Salerno Bridge drive over the freeway to be torn down. A new one would be brought up. We'd have full access both north and south in all directions. And to do that, we have to go through some areas where we have to acquire some property. It also includes drainage, it includes mitigation, and the construction of everything. So the project, as you look on the chart there, you'll see there's a new northbound ramp. Over there, it has to be braided with a bridge so that the cars coming and going in different directions will not have crash. It's a distance for crashes, and also on the going south, you will get off now at Oakland Park, and you will be an access road running along the Sawgrass Freeway that will take you up to the Pat Salerno. The other two on the south side are just modified a little bit to go forward. So we're here today to ask for the approval. We hope you can approve that. Also, I forgot to mention up on Oakland Park, part of the thing for the braiding and also for the access road, there has some work on the bridge there too. That's where we're looking at, and just making it quick. So looking at a little bit of the costs, I know that's going to come up. For the design and construction, we're looking at $65 million plus $65,418,000. Of that, the state's going to put up $45,400,000 of that. We are only putting up $20 million of that process right there. That's our guaranteed maximum from the state, that it will not go above the $20 million cost for us. That's their price. It's for the local funding.
Larry, 29 million, correct? 29, because that's
sorry,
what's on
I'm
the
putting my
slide.
glasses on. The 29, yes, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read something here. I'm sorry, I apologize. So right now, we're looking for the 29. The portion of that for construction would be for the 20 million the county would put up. There's another 9 million we're looking at for the acquisition of right-of-way mitigation and drainage for the property there too.
Do you have any questions? Go ahead, Doug. Oh, Doug, you joined us.
Sorry I'm late, but I'm glad to see we're having partners.
Mr. Coolman, will you turn on your microphone, please?
Is it on?
No, it has to have hit the.
How about that one?
There you go.
All right. Sorry I'm late. I'm glad to see that we're only putting a portion in and everybody else is helping, and that means we're stretching our surtax dollars. So I'm very much in favor of it. Thank you.
Mr. Allen.
This project will inure to the benefit of the Turnpike Authority through increased revenues that will, from tolling, that will occur. Is that correct?
It will use, all the money from the tolling will go to the Turnpike enterprise.
And Pat Salerno Drive was built by the Turnpike Authority in an agreement with the Panthers to all have a revenue sharing for the increased revenues that would come from the, from Pat Salerno Drive. Rather than people getting off at Sunrise, they would come off of Pat Salerno Drive, which would be tolled at 75 cents, and at that point in time, that agreement, I don't know if that was still in place at the time, or at this time, or when it was refinanced, perhaps that disappeared, but shouldn't the Turnpike Authority participate with us relative to the revenues?
Originally, yeah, I know what you're saying there, but originally our agreement with the Florida Turnpike Enterprise was we'd pay for half of the design and construction cost, whatever that would be. Now that what's going on with for the construction costs, the state is paying $45,418,000 of that
But
cost.
is that for the, that's not just for the Pat Salerno Drive, but that's also for expanding the lanes. That whole interchange there is part of that project, right?
This is just to get no, it's really to get just the bridge and everything else in there. So the cost of this, yes, there are more lanes going in there, but if it's related to the turnpike, to the interchange, this is our cost. So remember, right now, if we didn't have this agreement, they went back to say we pay half instead of us paying $20 million, we'd be paying about $34 million, $33 million. So it is a savings to us in that.
Okay. And what participation level is City of Sunrise for this project?
On this project right now, the City of Sunrise is going to provide 7 parcels that we need for drainage, and they're going to pick up the cost for that.
What's the value of that? I mean,
We haven't
put a
appraised that
value
right
on it?
now, but we look at that as a substantial investment by the county.
Mr. Chair, I kind of like where you're going with this, Phil. I mean, can't we get back something from the Turnpike to reinvest?
Well, that was the agreement originally, as they said to us. We decided not to charge you half of what the original statement was. We'd pay for half of the design and construction. But now we're not asking you to do that. So we've asked that question, we pushed for that question, the answer is no.
Remind me, past history, I think that also originally the plan called for one, either an ingress or egress improvement, and now we're doing both in and out, right? I mean, wasn't that the original Pat Salerno plan was?
We discussed all different ways originally. The MPO, through the city's urging, went back and said, they supported only a full interchange.
Right.
So we're back at that, and we agreed to move forward under those directions.
All right. Does anybody else have any comments? Should we go ahead and make a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So it's a motion to approve as to the statutory the eligibility pursuant to Section 212055 Florida statutes, the project and expenditures in amount not to exceed $500,000 for the Broward County Public Works Department. Oh, no.
Well, you're
Angela,
the wrong
this-
one there.
Yeah, Angela, this has
one.
already been approved as eligible when
next
they
one.
did the 3 million.
So it's the funding, but we still have to determine that the funding is eligible. We have not done that. So the funding in the amount of $29 million for
Yes.
the design, construction, right-of-way acquisition, drainage, and land acquisition for the Pat Salerno exchange, the turnpike.
Okay. Does anybody want to still move that?
I'll move it.
Okay. Okay, great. Do we have any comments to the motion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, we're at number 6, MOU, Broward Commuter Rail for the PD&E.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Dr. Kelly has asked for a brief break.
Yeah, you want to have a? Oh, you're going to go? Okay.
That's not my presentation. I'm the previous one. That's for FDOT. That's after the mission.
Vince, we're just loading the updated FDOT presentation so it can flow right after yours.
Okay.
Just give us 1 second.
There you are. Yep. Thank you. I'm going to put it in the presentation format.
I don't want to go to the.
There you go. All right, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Hooper, other members of the board. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I'm Vince Ruddy. I'm County Chief Negotiator. Started working back in April, and I've been, among other things, working with a team of people from different departments of the county and also with our friends from FDOT and some other key stakeholders to move along this long-awaited project for a commuter rail. So I'm going to make a brief presentation, kind of an intro, kind of a, I want to call it a refresher because I think many of you saw a presentation back, I think it was in January of this year, January 29th, where a summary was given, you guys were given an overview. So this is going to be a chance to kind of like refresh your memories, give you some information about how far along we've come. We do have a motion to provide for Surtax funding for some initial preparatory work. And then my colleagues from FDOT will make a more detailed presentation of sort of where they're coming with the project development and environmental study. And also I was very encouraged to see on the agenda that there's a subsequent presentation on the Investment in Infrastructure Jobs Act, which you will see is very relevant to this project. So next slide, please. Is that better? All right, thank you. Once again, this project and the PD&E study that's now underway represents a partnership between FDOT and Broward County. The MOU was actually signed just the day before, I think, your board meeting. It was on the 28th of January. FDOT's leading, they're taking the technical lead on the PD&E study itself. Some of you, I think, maybe participated in a workshop last night that was held in this room. That was focused on the New River Crossing, which, among other things, they will be giving more details in shortly. They're focusing on the PD&E study, the environmental aspects, the various engineering and physical aspects, initial conceptual designs, and they're doing it in a way to maintain eligibility for federal funding, capital investment grants or CIG grants, and other potential sources of funding. The county's responsibilities, per the MOU that was signed, we are, first of all, we're leading on the financial plan. If this project does go ahead, we will be the primary financer for it, or the main sponsor for it. We are supporting stakeholder outreach. We've also been coordinating with FDOT and with local municipalities on the question of where stations will be located. Looking at a number of agreements. The county is going to be responsible for all of the local agreements and the agreements with the rail companies that will enable the project to take place. So these are interlocal agreements on such things as funding, interlocal agreements on access, right-of-ways, these types of things. We will be identifying the local share of capital costs and annual O&M funds and working again very closely with FDOT that's doing the technical work. This graphic here sort of shows the overall organizational approach. I mentioned that this is being done in a way that's consistent with Federal Transit Administration rules. The idea is that this project will apply for grants through the FTA. And to do that, we're sort of managing all the aspects so that it's all compliant with the FTA and with the associated NEPA, or National Environmental Protection Act, guidelines and requirements. The funding sources that we anticipate for this project will be federal. The grants can cover up to 50%, the FTA New Starts grants. The state of Florida, the state has its own New Starts program that we anticipate would kick in up to another 25%. Then you have the local government portions, which include the county as well as municipal governments. The municipal governments, in this case, we're expecting them to pitch in a portion to cover the local station development. And for that reason, we see they have a number of mechanisms, potential revenue sources they can use for that. Some of them are listed on this slide. Worth mentioning the private sector. Many of these transit projects which spur transit-oriented development open up opportunities for private developers to collaborate and do joint development projects. And the FTA actually encourages that. You actually get certain incentive and bonus points if you can bring in private investment and private development to do joint development, or P3s, as part of the project. So that's another element of this project that we're looking at. The various approaches that we'll use for the financing plan that we're developing, a lot of it's going to depend on, certain things such as track access and other agreements. We'll talk a little bit about who owns the rights. The rail itself, the corridor, the FEC corridor, is owned officially by the FECR Railroad Company. However, Brightline has a passenger easement, and to get the rights to operate passenger service on this rail corridor, we're going to have to negotiate and arrange for an access fee agreement with Brightline. And we'll also be negotiating maintenance and operational costs that the passenger rail service will generate on that same infrastructure. I mentioned before the local and private funding. It is key. You have to be able to demonstrate not just that you want to or you plan to, but there's a solid commitment and a confirmed funding source from the local source, not just the county, but any of the municipal players that are involved. And if you're bringing private developers into the equation, you also have to show firm commitments and clear evidence that funding is going to materialize. The government doesn't want to give you funding and then have the project not happen. Worth mentioning to this board is that this project itself, the commuter rail, was not included in the original financial plan that was used to substantiate the Surtax ballot initiative. The Surtax itself is good news. It improves the prospects for this kind of a project. But because it really was not included, it's a pretty significant investment. We have to, it really puts the emphasis on the fiscal discipline and how important that's going to be, how important it's going to be to leverage not just federal, but also state funding and municipal funding. The Surtax budget, as you know, included funding for up to 26 miles of light rail transit, along with 7 bus rapid transit corridors. This commuter rail, BCR, is not considered light rail. It's a different concept altogether. And we want to make sure that as this north-south connectivity is created, if it does go forward, that it doesn't sacrifice east-west connectivity. Next, please. And so this slide, again, a little bit of context. What I found is that when we talk about commuter rail, or as it used to be called, the Coastal Link project, a lot of people see that as they understand it to be different things, right? A lot of times commuter rail is not what you originally thought it was. I used to use the metro up in Washington, D.C. area before I moved down here to Florida 6 years ago. And, I used to commute to work on it, and I thought, hey, it's rail, I commute, it's commuter rail. No, It's not. That type of service, and down in Miami, the Metro Rail that they have down there, stations are spaced closer together. The train accelerates and stops much more faster. They're using electric motors and electrified third rails in many cases. That type of a heavy rail orientation is not what we're talking about here. It's not easy on commuter rail. So what this says is that commuter rail is typically put on freight rail lines. You're basically leveraging, taking advantage of an existing piece of infrastructure, which is good, right? We're not building a greenfield project from the ground up. We're actually leveraging existing assets, existing infrastructure. But that infrastructure is a freight rail. And there are certain limitations on that. The freight companies do not want to have an electrified third rail right next to their trains at street grade, and it's not possible. So there are certain limitations. Historically, commuter rail has served, dense urban centers, but bringing people to and from the suburbs into the cities to commute to work. So it's kind of has that background, that demographic. I mentioned the spacing of stations a little bit further apart. You can't have them every half mile or mile. Typically, they're more like 2.5 to 5 miles apart because of the nature of the locomotives. They're heavier diesel electric engines that are pulling, 3 or 4, maybe 5 passenger cars. So it does take them some time to pick up speed and slow down. If you put too many stations too close together, it operates at a very slow speed and it becomes not very practical. There are safety and traffic considerations. I mentioned that you're unable to put a third rail at grade. And for all these reasons, it depends on the place, the specific city or context. Sometimes commuter rail makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So before we run into this, we're doing this study, we're doing the project development and environmental study, and we're really making sure that that this project does make sense. So we've also, we do have, this is not the first project, right? In the United States right now, there's about 31 different commuter rail projects or programs that are already operating. This slide here shows on the map where they're located, and you'll see that, New York, the Northeast, highly dense, a lot of commuter rail projects also in California. Some of the most effective or cost-effective, I would say, on an operating cost per trip basis are in California, Colorado, Utah, and Pennsylvania. You can see the operating cost per trip data for those top 5 commuter rail services. Interestingly enough, there's 2 existing commuter rails right now in Florida. One is Tri-Rail, which you all know, and then the Sunrail project, the Sunrail commuter rail service up in Central Florida. The operating costs for the Florida systems to date have not been as cost effective as some of the more established and other locations. So it's something to keep in mind. And we believe that as we look at this specific Broward commuter rail project, because of this history and because of this fact, it will be worthwhile to really scrutinize, as I said earlier, think about fiscal discipline, looking at cost effectiveness so that we could have a higher performing project. The slide kind of shows here some of the future feasibility issues. There's some really positive developments. We signed the MOU. This corridor, compared to the CSX corridor where Tri-Rail operates, it's much closer to the urban cores. We do expect higher ridership than Tri-Rail. Most of the municipalities are on board to share the cost for stations. We've gotten, supportive positions from the municipalities in that regard. And the business community is very supportive of this project. The other good news is that Dade County, which is the southern extension of this Coastal Link commuter rail service, is already moving ahead. They just received formal notification from FTA that they have been allowed to enter into what's called project development phase. So they're moving ahead. They have their locally preferred alternatives, I think, are either confirmed or close to being confirmed. There are very interesting potential synergies and economies of scale possible because of Tri-Rail. If the FRTA is actually selected to operate this, it should be possible for them to take advantage of existing overheads from existing resources and do more with less, or be more cost effective than if you build a standalone independent new organization to do this. And I mentioned the federal funding being possible. Of course, with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it is very encouraging now. There's going to be a lot more money available. I expect there's still going to be a competitive environment. It's not just us and others talking about, hey, infrastructure is coming now and it's a big opportunity. Everybody's doing the same thing, and a lot of projects are being developed and submitted. So there will be a competitive environment, but there should be more funding available to go around, so that's good news. I think our colleagues that are making a presentation later can talk more to that issue. The challenges, I mentioned before that the project wasn't in the initial Surtax finance plan. This project, even though we're doing a good study now, the PD&E thing is moving ahead. It is separate from the Broward County system-wide transit study. We will need to integrate and kind of make sure that the two studies are closely coordinated. We are doing that with the help of the Broward County Transit and Transportation Department. Governance structure has not yet been defined. It's we're having conversations right now with Miami-Dade. We believe that any decisions in terms of how the governance will be done and how the operators will be selected will need to be coordinated with the other county being served, which at this stage is just Miami-Dade. I did mention the need for us to negotiate a track access agreement, and that fee that's anticipated is going to add to the operating costs. I just mentioned that because there's other projects that have had the luxury of already having the track access. In the case of Tri-Rail, the track was actually purchased outright. It was owned by, I believe, by FDOT, and they lease it back now to the freight company. And the same applies in some other projects. I think in Sunrail up in Central Florida also did a buyout of the track access, so they don't have to pay an annual fee for it. So in our case, it does not seem likely that FECR or Brightline are going to sell outright the tracks. So we're looking at probably an annual access fee. And then, of course, one of the bigger challenges is the new river crossing, which was the subject of last night's workshop. Fortunately, the FDOT team is identifying the alternatives, looking at each one and some of the pros and cons. And that process is moving along. I thought last night's workshop was actually quite good. We got a lot of feedback, a lot of good questions, comments, and suggestions that the team is taking on board. So this project is not ready to go. It's not, some people might say it's not even a project yet. It needs further analysis, more studies. And we are coming to you because the time has come, we believe, to start using a small amount of Surtax funding to complete the studies and to do the other obligations that the county has under our MOU with FDOT to collaborate on this PD&E study. So we're proposing the use of limited Surtax funds, a total of $2.35 million. This table here shows the breakdown of that. $100,500 is for a financial advisor specialized in transit projects and FTA grant applications that will work with us. They've actually begun working for us already using non-Surtax funding. We've started using general county funds to begin developing a financial model, but we'll need to spend additional money to use that model to run scenarios and do other aspects of the financial plan. We have a strategy and procurement support consultant. We've identified expert former leaders and other experts from New York, actually from the New York Metro North system. It's, I think, it's either the largest or the second largest commuter rail project. We have some very experienced experts that are helping us to kind of prepare our overall strategy and the procurement needed to have the resources on board to support this on our side. And the county attorney has also identified outside counsel, I guess they call it rail counsel, that specialize on rail projects. And I'll let my colleague Angela Wallace speak more to that particular element of the project. Angela, you want to say anything about the rail counsel component?
Well, no, the firm just specializes in negotiating with rail entities, the FEC and the CSX, and they've represented Tri-Rail in their negotiations related to the crossing between the east-west crossing in Miami-Dade from the Tri-Rail's tracks over to the downtown terminal. So it's just their expertise in dealing with access agreements for rail is why they're being engaged to assist with the planning process for commuter rail.
Thank you. And the last line item for General Engineering Consulting Services, or GEC contract, 2.1 million, the largest one. That is to make sure that the county has our own independent access to technical expertise, engineers, planners, and strategists that can support us as the negotiation goes forward with Brightline and with other key players, and to help ensure that we have the ability ourselves as a county to do technical work that's required to advance the project. The FDOT team is doing a lot on the PD&E study, but it's very focused and narrowly focused to fulfill our role to do the financial plan and to negotiate and set up the agreements with Brightline and with other players. We do need our own independent source of a GEC contractor. So that's not the full amount that's going to be needed if the project goes forward. This is an initial amount just to cover the studies and the negotiation and preparation of agreements. If we do reach that stage where the LPA is confirmed and the FTA approves us to go to project development, a much larger budget for project development and for engineering type work will be required. But we will cross that proverbial bridge or tunnel when we get to it. At this stage, we're just doing initial studies to make sure we can finalize this PD&E study and confirm that the project is indeed viable and can go forward as a grant application. With that, I'll open up to questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Mr. Frazier.
Since the surtax has the community small business participation as a part of this, what's being done to ensure that they're going to be a part of these 4 expenditures that you've indicated? That's one. Second part is that if it goes forward and you're going to need all this additional money and all these different agencies will come into play, which entity will be in charge of ensuring that there's CB participation? Of course, you got the feds coming in, you got the state, and you got Broward County and what have you. Each of those entities have small business participation, so which one will end up taking the lead on something like this?
Yeah, we expect a good portion of these services to be eligible and will have CBE participation in them. But I must say that when federal funding comes in and is used for any of the projects, we're not able to impose a CBE requirement. The federal government doesn't allow it. So we're going to be very careful for this initial work where the federal funding is not coming in. We will have a lot more latitude, and for those services for which CBE firms are available and can provide the service, they will be used. The 30% requirement will be included in the solicitation documents.
Okay.
When federal funding is...
The feds have a DBE requirement, so...
Yeah, the feds use DBE, and what we've seen in other cases, like for example in Miami-Dade, when they have put out solicitations, they've said that work may be funded either by local or by federal. If federal funds are used, it's different rules. It's DBE, here's the requirements. If it's local funds, they use their own local rules. And to answer your question about who's going to ensure that and oversee that and ensure that that's done, it will be our Office of Small Business and Economic Development, Sandy Michael McDonald, with whom I just spoke to yesterday about this matter. So we're in close coordination with them. Any procurement done for any of these will be coordinated very closely with Sandy Michael McDonald and his team.
Phil?
Mr. Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Oh.
No. I'll let Ms. Pennant go first.
All right. I was curious, you mentioned something about some fees that Brightline will be charged. How will you be able to control those fees?
They'll be pursuant to contract, whatever's negotiated through a contract.
Yeah, you negotiate that up front. Typically, you do a long-term agreement over 30 years, 50 years, whatever it is, and you say, this is what we agreed to pay for access to the rails over this period of time. That's typically how it's done.
Right, I just want to make sure that there is some thought on that, so it doesn't become a runaway train, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that having, Brightline is a train company that's using the top engineers and experts in rail services, you know, that's their business. County is, we're not like Miami-Dade, we don't have existing rail services, we don't have a built-in, in-house pool of expertise that we can draw upon. So having that and being able to procure that and have that alongside of us as we negotiate with Brightline, we think that's going to be very important so that we don't get taken advantage of or railroaded in the negotiations. But it, you know, we want to be on an equal level playing field and have experts on our side that can defend our interests.
Mr. Allen?
Last night's meeting relative to the New River Crossing, that was a component eventually of the total project. There were numbers that were thrown out last night and in the newsletter that I read recently, you know, of a tunnel costing up to $1 billion and various bridge options of 300 million or whatever. What is the magnitude of cost of the total system from Deerfield to Miami-Dade? I mean, is there a number out there that?
Until the locally preferred alternative is confirmed for, in this case, for the New River Crossing, it's going to be hard to tell you this is the total estimated cost. If it's tunnel, if that is the option that's selected, it obviously is a much larger cost.
What I'm saying is there were four series of numbers given last night. How does that compare to the range of numbers for the balance of the system?
Yeah, I think the rest of the system, those capital cost estimates are just recently being prepared, and they're still under revision and being looked at. But just to give you a sense, so you can have a sense of the magnitude, it's in the neighborhood of about $500 million. And it could be lower, and it could be higher, depending on a number of factors.
Now, I've heard comments that says that to meet the standards, and I think those numbers were in the presentation here relative to the range of cost, of passenger cost, trip costs for these similar type of systems, and federal guidelines that say that, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 to $10 a trip in order to meet this threshold of FTA, you know, that in order to reach that, you couldn't include the bridge option or the New River Crossing option as being part of that $10.
That's our current expectation, and I believe what you're referring to is the FTA as part of its New Starts grant application policy has a criteria and scoring, you know, what do you call that? It's a formula, right, with a number of different criteria. There is a cost effectiveness criteria, which is one of many. It has a weighted average score, and to achieve a medium score on the cost effectiveness criteria, your total annualized capital and operating cost per boarding, per trip, needs to be in a certain range. At the top of the range, yes, it's $9.99 for a medium score. We're going to be struggling to hit that, even if the New River Crossing
Even without the New River. So, I mean, you had the New River that now defines that becomes a local cost of the project, not subject to availability of federal funds to provide match money.
It could still be, that New River Crossing could still qualify for federal funds, but it would not be the New Start grant. It would be a different funding source. We're not sure. It could be an earmark. It could be a different grant program, but it would not be included in the FTA grant application that has been spoken about for a New Starts grant. It would be packaged separately, and that's what we're currently looking at. That is, we think, going to be the option that maximizes our score and solves the problem of the cost effectiveness criteria. But I should simply say that the county has to be responsible stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, including the surtax, obviously. And we're not going to just say, oh, it's separate and, you know, there's another funding pool that we're just going to build the bridge or the tunnel, whatever. We have to be careful and responsible and make sure that the cost effectiveness is in an acceptable range. it might not be the same range that FTA is using. It might be a little bit higher. The score might be medium low. But we need to, that part of the financial analysis, the financial modeling, and the overall financial plan is something that we have not yet completed. It's just, the cost estimates were literally, the initial estimates came out last week, so we're kind of at the early stages of determining that and plotting out our next steps, our plan. And the financial advisor portion of this ask is going to be a very important portion of that. We're bringing in advisors with a lot of experience with these types of transit projects.
Who is the financial advisor that you've selected?
At the moment, we used one of the advisors that's on our bench, which is called PFM, and they have a transit practice which is very well established and known. They're centered up in Chicago, but they have also presence here. They're actually working with Miami-Dade on some of the transit projects that they have.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the firm. And going back to your original comment, as you started your presentation, you pointed out, rightfully so, that this project was never contemplated for Surtax funding. And I think that's something that we need to keep that in mind. And, you know, you can plan these projects for the next 20 years, and during which point in time, public sentiment, political sentiment, et cetera, change. I mean, we saw that with the wave, that we spent an awful lot of money and a lot of commitments to be subjected to a change in political atmosphere relative that killed the project eventually. You know, we've got some, you know, pretty tough issues as relates to our role. I mean, we don't get to vote on the final determination. We can recommend, and we determine that it meets the statutes. That's our role, basically, but we also, I guess, are somewhat guardians of that public purse as it relates to the surtax, and we make a recommendation. This is something that's going to be around for a while, and we all need to consider that.
Mr. Kuhlman.
Yes, it's unfortunate that it wasn't part of the Surtax program, but that's somewhat understandable. I think there's going to be things coming down the pipe for the next 10, 15, 20 years that weren't ever programmed. So I have really two questions. One for you, Vincent, and by the way, I really enjoy your presentation. You're right to the point. And the second one is for Gretchen over there. You have a request today for $2.35 million, and I think it's a valid request because I think the county should be using some surtax dollars for it. But what do you think, and this is maybe easier than the total cost of the project, what do you think your ask is going to be over the next, let's see, make five years? How much money do you think you're going to come back in here for surtax? You can think about that while I ask Gretchen the next question, which is based on our budget and looking at our budget. I know there's some parts of discretionary stuff and things of this nature. Where does this 2.35 fit into this budget? And how much discretionary income are we having? Are we doing better by, I know tax collections went down and things, you know, how does this 2.35 and what new number Vincent's going to give you fit into our overall budgeting process?
Well, thank you very much, Vice Chair, for the question.
Mask off, please. I'm hard of hearing, but I'm really hard of hearing with people in masks.
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair. So I think as we mentioned to you during our budget workshop and our presentation to you on the 19th and the 20th, with respect to the fiscal year 2022 budget, our county administrator and our budget director anticipated that there would be the need for a potential surtax investment because, as I mentioned during our briefings, the county has been absorbing the funding necessary to fulfill our obligations under that memorandum of understanding with FDOT since January when we entered into it. So they did set money aside in reserves. In those reserves were a variety of different projects, some of which have come before you today. This is one of those. And they have been planning for the potential outlay of funding for the commuter rail. So specifically to this $2.35 million, We have it, and we planned for it, and we have adequate resources to cover this and then some. But with respect to how revenues from the sales tax are going, I'm going to have to wait until we have all of the final numbers. I think Ms. Dallyjohns, when she sent out the finance report, mentioned to you in her email that we're still doing all the closeout. We're looking at exactly where we are for 22 versus what we anticipated, and we're going to be bringing that back to you hopefully when we meet with you all in January.
And to your question, Vice Chair, I'll just say that I would like to ask to be able to come back and answer that question perhaps at your next meeting. We've only just started developing the financial model, and I don't think it would be a good idea to start throwing numbers out at this stage. I mean, you've asked a question about where's the New Crossing and the balance. I gave you a really rough kind of starting point, but one way to look at this is if FTA comes in and approves a grant and it's the typical 50% contribution, and FDOT, the state comes in and kicks in another 25%, we're at 25% of capital costs. But that doesn't include the ongoing operation costs, which yes, there will be some fare box collection and some other lesser sources of revenue. But in general, public transit, you all know that it tends to be subsidized, and this will be no exception. To give you a number of what that subsidy would be over time, it's too early.
Very acceptable answer. Just a general comment for the board. I think even though we're not have a final say in everything, there are times when we're going to have to maybe decide on priorities, because there are going to be things that are on the list, there's going to be things that are coming to the list, and sometimes we may be asked to prioritizing. I happen to think this one is a big priority, regardless of numbers at this point. I think it's very important to this community. So, thank you.
So, and this is maybe adds to the items to come back with and just something to think about. I'm definitely curious, not just about cost, but at what point in the process we can kind of establish the viability. And what I mean by that is, like we mentioned, maybe what these negotiations would look like with FEC and Brightline, I think, are the parties, right? So will they come to the table? Like, at what point will we kind of know that, right? Because I feel like the risk here could be we get to a certain point and there's just kind of no deal. And is there a history of there being no deal in situations like this? Would this be one agreement amongst three parties? How complicated is that? I'm not really sure. But that, I feel like they're in a strong position and we kind of need something here. So just curious about your thoughts in terms of how we spend down this money to build our case, and then do we have any idea at all as to whether they'll come to the table and want to make this happen?
With regard to your last question, I'm pretty convinced that yes, Brightline is very interested and they will come to the table. They've been coming to the table and knocking on doors. They did it down in Miami-Dade, and they're doing it here with us. They realize that we have certain limitations. For example, we're not able to formally start negotiations until a much later stage. The FTA does not allow it. If we're going to get that federal funds, they don't want to see the track access agreement that's been negotiated and signed ahead of time. That will prejudice us. So they've given us, we're taking on board that type of advice. Now, have we had discussions with Brightline? Are we kind of preparing for the day when we can negotiate? Yes, we're doing that. I believe several board members from our Board of Commissioners have inquired about the status of appraisals. Appraisal work has been done. The county itself used its own funds, not Surtax funds, but general funds to cover the cost of appraisal. So preparatory work is being done and a negotiation strategy will be developed. But we really need these specialized resources, the engineers, the lawyers, and the financial advisors to become a part of our team so that, in addition to the great work that FDOT's doing more on the technical side, we can really look at this in a more holistic way and address some of the interests. But timing-wise, I don't think it's going to be really, we'll be into summer of next year, I believe, before we really see our ability to kind of have a more clear picture and that viability is more confirmed. I think the LPA is planned to be confirmed by then, the locally preferred alternative, I should say, and that's where we'll know costs and other factors.
Okay. I mean, I want to voice my support for it as part of the board. We need solutions that are not just cars, so hopefully we can keep it moving forward.
Ms. Bennett?
Real quick, I'm supportive as well, but I'm just curious to know, what are the possibilities? Is it high that we'll get, you know, a good chunk of this infrastructure money to help support this?
It might be better for, who's making the presentation on the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act?
Mr. Chair, may I? We do have a presentation scheduled from Thorn Run Partners. We're going to have to do that presentation in this room because it is a virtual presentation and we don't have the capacity to do that in our workshop room. And I think that Mr. Burns is going to talk you through some of the options, but I will just say, based on all the conversations that we've had thus far, until the funders, until the various agencies actually develop the grant guidelines, the guidance, the eligibility criteria, until we have a better understanding of what some of these new discretionary grant programs are going to look like, it's going to be very difficult for any of us, whether it be a county staff or FDOT, to be able to tell you what the chances are of us being able to access those funds are.
I appreciate the fact that, first of all, the county hired a chief negotiator. I love that. And I also appreciate the fact that we're going to put money into a legal counsel that has expertise in rail and that type of investment. So I think this is money well spent. And on that, let's call the motion.
Okay, and I guess I saw Mr. Allen looking at me. It is Chuck Spitulnik, the one who negotiated for the port. Mr. Allen is familiar with the firm and the attorney from a previous port project while he was with the county. So,
I have just one more question.
We used them for the
intermodal.
ICTF, Intermodal Container Transfer Facility, as well as the overpass, and he was very capable and assisted us in those negotiations with FEC at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another point to continue to make is, yes, passenger traffic and options for mass transit, et cetera, are important, but not forgetting the impact of the train or freight on that rail line, and whether double tracking is sufficient to preserve not only commuter rail, but also the freight transport, which is going to be even more important in the future.
Okay. Is your question, does it have to do with the motion, or is it more conceptual of the whole?
Well, I wanted to first of all say I agree with Shay, but I want to ask Gretchen, this is the first request of Surtax dollars for this, a project that wasn't in the original budget, correct?
Yes, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, we've been using general funds and in-house staff to perform all of the responsibilities under the PD&E thus far.
I'll make a motion that we pass.
If I might.
You'll just assume her motion when she says it.
Okay. Motion to approve, well, first of all, the planning, development, construction, operation, and maintenance of fixed guideway systems are permissible under the statute. And rail is a fixed guideway system and is permissible under the statute. So the motion would be to approve as eligible pursuant to 212055 Florida statutes, the project and expenditures in the not-to-exceed amount of $2.35 million to support the county's planning and development for Broward Commuter Rail Project.
I would so move that.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any more comment? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, may I just explain what will have to happen? what will have to happen logistically. So we have FDOT here in person to do the very next presentation, and then we have a virtual presenter that's Mr. Greg Burns, doing the infrastructure update. We need to remain in this room in order for him to be able to participate virtually and go through his presentation. At that point, you can adjourn the regular meeting, because everything else after that is presentations and the retreat. And we can move into the other room, we can eat, and we can do the last presentation. I know the MPO is also here in person, so I want to make sure that they have an opportunity. We can delay one of our presentations since we are running behind. We can postpone that one and do that at a later time.
So there's only 2 that have to be done in this room.
Yes.
So you guys okay going? Okay, please.
Okay, so at this time, if I could ask FDOT to come forward.
I think we're ready, right?
Okay, yep, great. I was going to say good morning, but good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Braun, the Director of Transportation Development with the Florida DOT District 4 office. Just piggybacking on that last presentation by Mr. Ruddy, we're going to be giving an update on the Broward Commuter Rail project. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to present and give you an update on this project. Vince covered a lot of material, obviously, related to this, and I do commend this board for that last action you took. We sincerely appreciate the partnership with the county, other stakeholders as we're working through this project. It has been a tremendous partnership for the MOU with the county, and we're looking forward really to the next steps and continuing the momentum on this project. I'm going to touch on this slide really, and just to reiterate it, a lot of the discussion this morning touched on this as well. Just the importance of commuter rail, not only to the community, the county, but the region. So just a couple of key points here, which align a lot with your goals and objectives, as well as other stakeholders on this project. So again, everything from economic and residential growth, development, transit-oriented development came up earlier in a couple of presentations. Enhancing the quality of life, right, for just providing those mobility choices for the region and for the county. Access to employment, things again that continue to come up in front of this board and other stakeholders. Being sensitive to the environment, providing those travel time choices, improving travel times, and someone mentioned earlier, right, something as an alternative to automobile. So again, exciting project. We appreciate the partnership with the county, and with that, I'm going to hand off to Phil Schwab. He's our project manager for this project, and he'll get into some of the details of the project and really bring up to speed on the latest status and some of the next steps. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Steve. We're going to do a quick switch of the slides. There was an update we made.
Can we get your name one more time, please?
Phil Schwab.
For the recorder, the spelling of the name is on the very first slide, I believe, the presentation slide, I hope.
Thank you. All right, sorry about that. All right, good afternoon again. Again, I'm Phil Schwab, DOT project manager for the Broward Commuter Rail project. The graphic you see over to the right is the limits of the project. So we actually start in Miami-Dade County at the Aventura station, and we'll run up to Deerfield Beach. The Aventura station and commuter line to the south is actually being done by Miami-Dade County under the Northeast Corridor project. So they actually got started a couple years ahead of Broward County. I didn't touch anything. So they actually got started a couple years before Broward County, and ultimately Palm Beach County, we're looking at commuter rail continuing up there. They're all part of what was done under a study called the Coastal Link, which covered 85 miles of track in all three counties. Each county's moving forward in different time frames, with Miami-Dade again starting a couple of years ago, Broward County now with the MOU and DOT moving forward this year. And we expect Palm Beach at some point to be able to move forward as well. We have identified as part of the study 6 locations for stations. So we've made technical recommendations. We've been doing a lot of coordination with FECR, and Vince mentioned it regarding the rail corridor itself. You have FECR and Brightline on that corridor, which we do a lot of coordination with them, as well as the Miami-Dade County project team. So on the corridor, FECR owns the right-of-way. So they own the right-of-way. They also run the freight. Brightline has a passenger rail easement. That easement that they have with them envisions a commuter line coming on as well. So both FECR and Brightline had envisioned that as they worked out that agreement. We really have to satisfy both. I know you mentioned with Vince's presentation the concern about freight. They will be the #1 priority when it comes to ensuring that they're meeting their time frames and so forth, which is part of the easement that they have with Brightline. Sorry. So the environmental study looks at many environmental considerations: the social, the natural, the physical, the cultural. Along the corridor primarily, and you'll see as part of the New River Crossing, is that we have a historical society and areas centered around the New River. So we have a concentration of cultural aspects with that, but also the social with the different communities, making sure that we have a cohesive project that doesn't separate communities but can help bring them together. Another aspect that we hear a lot about is the east-west traffic. Adding trains, we'll have more grade crossing closures to get those trains across. Now it is commuter line, so it's going to move much quicker, similar like Brightline trains. They can move much quicker through those grade crossings versus the freight, but there will be more trains. So we've projected traffic. We're going through that, getting that approved now, what the traffic will be in 2045. So that we can analyze what kind of impacts the additional grade crossing closures will have and develop any type of mitigation strategies that are needed if we see any type of concerns. But that traffic analysis is ongoing, so we'll have that done in the next month or two. So one of the big things when we talk about alternatives, it's really centered around the New River Crossing. And I know you talked earlier about that. There's 4 options that were done at the feasibility study that was done in 2020. One includes a tunnel, and then there's 3 bridge alternatives. You see those at the lower left, and those cost ranges are for those alternatives. So outside of that, as Vince mentioned, you have another 25 miles of track and so forth that have to get improvements and stations and so forth, and that's in the ballpark of a $500 to $600 million outside of that. So this comparison that we have there, just from the cost standpoint, has a range. So typically we'll do an estimate on an alternative, and then we'll look at what if it's 35% lower, and what if it's 15% or 35% higher and 15% lower, I think is the range we kind of put in there. So that's where that range comes from. And I'll explain the different alternatives to you in just a minute, but it is a balance. As you can see from the picture to the right, there's a lot of development going along the corridor. The freight line there, which you see a blue highlighted line over, is the existing freight line. And the bridge is actually down, and the freight line will remain in all cases at that level, but these bridge alternatives will be just to hold the Brightline trains and commuter line trains. So the freight line, we are coordinating with FECR about shifting that track in order to minimize the impacts around the new river crossing. This will allow us to get through there without impacting the historic district and help save on some of the right-of-way that potentially is needed. To the north, which is the upper left of that picture, you see the Brightline station. So those alternatives that you see below, they also include the station because the station is so close, and because of the geometry, which you're going to see in a minute when I show you the profiles, there's a major impact to that station. What you'll see is on the mid-level, high-level, and tunnel options, it's considerable, where the station has to be elevated for the mid-level and high-level bridges, or it has to be underground, 63 feet, I think, underground for the others. So it has a big influence on it. So when we talk about those alternative costs, you'll see from this next diagram, which are profiles, which the blue line on the top, those are profiles. So if you look at the area where we have MHW, which is mean high water at the top there, and those different dimension lines just show the distance of the different alternatives, either above that water line or below it. So we have the tunnel, which needs to go about 66 feet under it because we have to keep a certain distance from the top of the tunnel to the bottom of the canal. There's a requirement there. So because of the extension and the profiles that we have to get the track back up and meet the existing track, it takes quite a distance. So you can see the tunnel is 3.25 miles, that influence area. The other things that influence some of the tie-in points and what we can and can't do is the existing track geometry. If we have horizontal curves, we can't also introduce vertical curves. So it really creates a lot of challenges when we're working the geometry on that. But just going back to the alternatives, so those are clear. The one that has the least impact is the 25-foot above mean high water, what we call that the low-level bascule bridge. So it'll have a bascule bridge. So the marina industry is definitely not supportive of the low-level bridge because the marinas deal with boats that are mostly greater than 25 feet. So they seem more supportive of mid-level or even the fixed or the tunnel, but they seem to think the mid-level really serves all their needs from a boating standpoint. And that mid-level is 56.5 feet above mean high water, and that'll have a bascule bridge, so that'll open and close. These bridges are anticipated to remain open, similar to the existing FEC line. It'll remain open until the train comes and it'll lower, train goes by, then it opens again. And then the high level goes up to 80 foot, and with that we don't need a bascule bridge, so that can be a fixed bridge, so you don't have the openings or closing, and it accommodates all the boats that need to go through there. The tunnel, of course, it's a little bit longer, it goes 66 feet. The station, in that case, would be underground, just north of Broward Boulevard. I do want to point out that the tunnel and the mid-level and high-level bridges, all of those bypass the Broward Boulevard road. So from a traffic standpoint, there's less trains that are going to be going through there. So that's a benefit whenever you have that. So these are just some of the renderings that were done back at the feasibility study. And what we've done is also break down the costs a little bit more. I know we provided you ranges on the previous page, particularly when it came to the tunnel. We were getting a lot of concerns about the tunnel costs and what we're projecting for tunnel costs. So we have a great amount of detail that's available for anybody who wants to review or look at the cost, scrutinize the cost. So we want to make that available to anybody. So we just summarize some of the major items there, which includes the stations and so forth, so you can kind of see the different impacts each alternative has in that area. But the stations become a fairly large part of the cost, especially when you look at, we're required to have a 25% contingency from FTA. So we have that in the cost. The professional fees go up to about 30% of the cost. So when you look at just the straight construction numbers, they're lower than what the ranges are, because within those ranges we have to include all these additional costs that are true project costs. So a lot of times when you talk to contractors, how much does it cost you to build something, they'll tell you a pretty good number, but then when you add in all these other things that have to go with it, the price goes up and up. But so we have the mid-level bridge on the bottom there and a low level on the top, and then the graphic on the top here represents a fixed level bridge. And then, of course, from the tunnel in that area, you wouldn't see anything. The tunnel will be underground. We have looked at the low level. I want to just go back from the feasibility study. We had a 21-foot clearance at the feasibility study, but we were also closing the Himmershey Road. We've developed the geometry in a way that we bumped it up to 25 feet. Now we can keep Himmershey open. One of the goals of the project team is to improve on any concerns or issues we were having with each one of the alternatives, including the tunnel alternative, where we had a single bore, which was becoming a challenge from a constructability standpoint. Now we are looking at twin bores as part of that tunnel alternative. So I know you already talked about costs and cost effectiveness. The assumptions right now by the team is that the capital cost would be a split between 50% federal funds and 25% local and state funds. The operating costs, though, would have to come from the local source, and that could be generated from fares, some of your local sources, as well as whether there's advertising or sponsorship opportunities. And then when it comes to the cost effectiveness, I know Vince already covered it fairly well regarding potential for two projects, meaning the New River crossing would have to be separated out from the cost effectiveness model in order to rate. And again, that's for the New Starts program, the FTA New Starts. Doesn't mean that the New River crossing can't qualify for other federal funding and so forth, which I think the target would be to keep that 50-25-25 ratio if possible. And of course, with the new infrastructure bill, I think everybody's hopeful that it can help their communities and so forth. So I know there'll be a lot of talk about that and a lot of research on that in order to take advantage of the opportunities that now present themselves. So as far as our next steps, we're planning a public workshop, alternatives public workshop. I know we held a workshop specific to the New River crossing last night. We're going to continue working with those stakeholders throughout in order to get these alternatives to a certain point where people can make decisions or opinions to help support and build a consensus to a locally preferred alternative, because that's really the critical part of the project, is that if there's consensus for a locally preferred alternative, that allows us to get into FTA's project development. That's when we can start competing for that New Starts money and complete the NEPA study that will be required as part of that, moving into what we anticipate a public hearing in the summer or fall of 2022. And of course, the county commission would make that vote on the LPA. Ultimately, the MPO will adopt a work program that supports it as well. So they'll have to concur. And then we expect the PD&E to be completed early 2023, but the final design and can start, an overlap with that toward the end of 2022. With that, I think that was all I had. Okay.
You have questions? Mr. Allen, Mr. Kuhlman after.
I have a technical question as it relates to freight. There will be, or has been, some ongoing concern, particularly from maritime interest as it relates to the existing Basque Bridge. And I know the study assumes that freight continues to operate with the low-level Basque Bridge that is in place today, maybe a different alignment or whatever. There's some, or I've heard issues as it relates to, well, why don't you put freight on either the mid-level or the high level or the tunnel? Technically, can a freight operation operate with those kind of grades?
No, the freight can't operate with the grades that we're creating, okay. and they will not go in a tunnel for sure. I will let you know that we are running operations models. So when we run operations model, we include the freight and we include projected freight. We include Brightline trains and our own commuter line trains. Just recently, the Coast Guard approved, they're actually a citation or regulation for the FEC bridge. So they have to keep the bridge open when they can, but they have to have it open the first 10 minutes of every hour. So that's part of their operations model. We would suspect that we would fall in line with the commuter line bridge if it turns out to be a bridge, mid-level bridge or a low-level bridge. We would have to operate under the same circumstances. And I think from the marina industry, as long as they know what that schedule is, you know, they can plan accordingly. So we have been working with them. One of the things that came up last night was the boating industry is just doing tremendous. It's growing and growing. So they're concerned about the overall, you know, how many more boats are going to be out there and so forth. So even though a low-level bridge can serve a large percentage of total boats, you know, it could be 90% of total boats go under that bridge, the 80% of the marina traffic is greater than that. And so they don't want the water jammed up with all these boats when they're trying to get through as well. So they bring up different points like that for us to consider as we move forward.
Doug? Yeah, you had stated early on that there will be the freight will still go at grade. Obviously, based on the profiles you have here, the freight train cannot go in the tunnel. If the tunnel was longer, though, the freight can go in a tunnel, but not the one you're studying right now, correct?
No, in discussions with FECR, who runs the freight, they said they will not go in a tunnel, period.
Well, I'm a little confused because they run tunnels with trains in them all over the rest of the world, number one. Number two, they cannot operate at this profile, I agree.
Yeah.
And it would probably make the tunnel twice as long, which would be great for the east-west traffic. Maybe we can't afford it, but that's the point. One thing's always bugged me. How many freight trains a day, how many Brightline trains a day projected, and how many commuter trains a day in the next, give me an average over the next 5 years, because obviously they're going to go up. I'm just curious, it's the first time I've heard that the Coast Guard requires it to be open for only 10 minutes, which is interesting.
They want a fixed schedule for the bridge, and so it's open 10 minutes of the first hour from, I think, not 5 a.m. I have to pull up the regulation, but there's a certain time period that they have to have it open, and it's the first 10 minutes. Well, actually, it's 10 minute a schedule for 10 minutes of an hour, and then between the hours of noon and 2, they have to have an additional 10-minute hour, or an additional 10 minutes
for the boats.
For the boats.
So maybe the simpler question is, when we have all three of these going across, can you have all of the trains and still meet that requirement?
Yes.
So in theory, you don't need either the bridge or the tunnel.
No, I'm not sure I'm following.
Well,
your question.
if you're telling me that all the trains in these three things can all go through there, and with the exception of they can't use it for the 10 minutes an hour, and we can still accommodate all the trains with that existing bridge.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying the existing bridge has a requirement that they must have it open the boats,
Right.
10 minutes of every hour.
Yes.
And between the hours of noon and 2, they have to have an additional 10 minutes.
Okay. With that requirement, the freight that's going over there seems to work. Some of the Brightline seems to work, but there are going to be more. And the commuter rail, we don't know. But my question is, isn't that 50 minutes in a typical hour? Can we accommodate all the rail traffic or not? Do we have to have the bridge? Have to have the bridge. I'm just asking
You got to have it to do the commuter. To do the new commuter, you
Well,
have
wait a
to-
minute, wait a minute.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not running these trains at the same time on the track. They obviously have to have time in between them. But for 50 minutes, how many trains can you run through that opening?
Right. Well, you got to remember these trains have to stop and at the stations and so forth. So from an operational standpoint, you may be able to show that it could work. But the projected trains that we have to project for,
Another way to think about it is we're at 20% capacity or 40% capacity today, and if you had all this, would be at 200% capacity. So you're saying we have to have a relief valve.
Yes.
When do you think you have to have that relief valve?
I don't think we've tried to project that, because typically the trains on day one most likely will run similar to what they do in 2045 from a commuter line standpoint, so that you can have 60-minute headways, off peak, and 30-minute headways during peak hours. So you may have trains that are fuller as you go into the future, but you probably have still the same amount of trains.
All right, I'll ask my questions at another meeting, not this one. But I was just shocked to I found out that trains can go through a tunnel if the grade's properly. You're telling me that the FEC won't put their train in a tunnel, which is the first time I've ever heard that.
It's their track.
I'm not saying it isn't their track,
They
Alan.
just don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. It's their track and they don't want to do it. Am I right about that?
I don't know that we could even afford it if they wanted to do it.
But it's a non-starter. So I was there yesterday. I learned a lot. It was a good workshop. And, there are times when the tunnel, the intent of the tunnel is good because it's looking at our city in a long term. And I know that the mayor of Fort Lauderdale has been pushing it, and he cares about the consequences of doing something that might affect a city long-term, and then you decide you've done it, and then you think, oh my God, what did we do? So I am on the same page with him on that. And I'm saying this now because we're all here and we represent the community, and this city is our county hub. It's where a lot of people work. It's a big generator for economic development, for tourism, and when people come into our downtown. So I think we need to be super careful as to how we move forward. And money, although it has to be one of the considerations, so does the quality and the value of our county seat. So, so as I was looking at it, there were some comments that were made. I think one of the commissioners made a comment where if it's one on top, if it's a bridge, a 56-foot bridge, it's only 40-something feet to come down. And if it's a tunnel, you got to come out of the ground. You got to take some sort of elevator or some way to get up. But honestly, I don't know if that, to me, it doesn't make much of a difference because you can take an escalator. You're going to have to take an escalator up or you're going to have to take an escalator down. And everything that comes up must go down type thing. So, and you're going to have to improve the station no matter what to accommodate whatever it is we do. When I sat through the aesthetic part of it, it seemed pretty clear that the taller and the more slender the bridge, the more aesthetically pleasing it is. And I just feel like if we don't do the tunnel, that taller bridge, you're going to get 100% of the boats are going to go over it, under it. You're not going to need a what's it called, a bascule?
A bascule bridge, like a bridge tender operations.
It looks very modern and very, so I'm supportive personally of the tunnel or the 86-foot bridge. I just think it's going to, and the higher you get, the less you separate out two neighborhoods, west and east, right? And I just think it treats our downtown, it treats our neighborhoods that are surrounding it in a more clear and unobtrusive way. So, but I do think that we need to support this. And when they do come to us and ask for our support, I think this is one of the biggest things that we will be doing when it comes to transportation, along with some of the east-west stuff that we're going to be doing in the future. And it's super important that we support this. And I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. And, I hope we can get this thing on its way.
Mr. Chair, a quick
Yes.
question, and you may have touched on this, and this may sound a little naive, but the underground tunnel concept, does the water table affect that in any way, shape, or form? You hear about, you know.
Yeah,
No?
sea level rise, actually, sea level rise
rising.
came up last night in the meeting, which is a good point, and we'll continue to work on that and let everybody know how that may or may not affect any of the alternatives. They brought it up more from how many boats can pass under a bridge if the water's now 4 feet higher and that type of stuff. As far as sea level rise, when it contains, a tunnel's in the water table anyhow. So it's more at the portals where the tunnel comes up, whether you have to provide extra protection. If you're gonna come up in an area that tends to flood and you normally have, protection around there that would prevent waters from getting into the tunnel area, they may have to be higher walls. I don't know. We haven't looked at it in that kind of detail yet, but that's what I would anticipate as far as sea level rise and tunnels.
I'll tell you that the concrete that they're making, the mixes now, are self-healing, so when cracks occur.
Microphone, Mr. Chair.
Turn it off.
Nowadays, the concrete that they're doing when they make a tunnel or a piling that is used for a bridge, it has it's called one of the mixes is called Penetron, but it's got a crystalline mixture that fixes cracks and doesn't allow water to come through, and there's really advanced technology as it goes, as concrete, right? Am I right or wrong about that?
Yeah, I mean, the tunnels go through water tables all the time.
Yeah.
So it's going underwater anyhow. I think the sea level rise aspect of it is more the type of pressures that you would get and whether they can withstand that. And then also at the portals where you would have flooding that could impact or have to have you continuously. They'll have pumps in those tunnels anyhow.
Yeah, right.
That'll pump water out, like rainwater still gets in it and just water and so forth. So they'll have to pump that out regardless.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
My comments were not that I didn't support a tunnel or a bridge. I do.
Right.
My comment was trying to figure out when the existing facility is going to be overburdened and how soon we have to get something done. Because we have the freight, we're going to have Brightline, we're trying to have the commuter rail, and eventually, if we don't do something, we're going to have logjam. That's what I was trying to figure out, and I got an answer.
Does the commuter rail happen if we don't fix the bridge or the tunnel alternative? The commuter, the coastal link, that doesn't happen unless we do the bridge.
Yeah, you have to have a new river
So
crossing.
it's not changing until we come up with the alternative.
All right, and it's going to be a few years, even if we had a decision today, it'd be a long time before we have something physically in place.
That's right.
So that's what I was trying to find.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it would not go operational north of the river until
Right.
the additional crossing was in place.
In fact, may have to happen just based on time frame.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your effort. Really appreciate it. Do we have one more? Okay. I'm getting hungry.
Greg, can you confirm that you can speak? I just want to make sure that we can all hear you. Greg, are you on the conference line? So he confirmed to me that he was on and that he could hear us, but I'm not sure that we can hear him. Can anybody in the booth help with technical issue here?
Gretchen, can you hear me now?
Great, there he is. Okay, so Mr. Burns, go right ahead, and if you'll just let me know when you'd like me to advance your slides, please.
Sure, thanks, and apologies for the delay. I had to hit some key thing on my end. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry to continue to force you to sit in this room for longer than you may have planned to do, but I'm here to provide you all with a legislative update this afternoon on primarily the infrastructure package. Next slide, please. So this bill, the now known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, which, as someone may have mentioned earlier, is going to be quite the mouthful for the next couple of years, became law on Monday afternoon at about 3 o'clock. I think when I wrote this slide, it had not yet been signed into law, but we anticipated that it would be at that time. It is now a finally a $1.2 trillion bill that includes two main parts. And it's really important that we begin to understand some of these details, because I think they're really going to help you inform discussions that you all have about a variety of federal funding for needs in the future. The two main components are roughly half of the bill is an extension of the surface transportation law that we've had before, which most recently has been known as the FAST Act. So that is really considered to be sort of baseline spending, continuing what we've done before. Now, granted, this $1.2 trillion bill does include a boost in spending compared with the past surface transportation bill, the FAST Act, but it is still a continuation of existing programs. So I think that's important to note. There is about $550 billion in additional investment that this bill also makes, the IIJA. So that's where the new money comes from. Keep in mind that this is meant to be a 5-year bill, or frankly is a 5-year bill. So there's about $110 billion per year. Well, looking ahead, this next slide gives you a good picture of what the infrastructure proposal that President Biden initially proposed looks like compared with what was eventually passed in the final bill. You'll see that much of it was cut out and much of what remained got smaller. Remember that President Biden initially proposed $2.6 trillion in infrastructure investment, and that Congress ultimately passed a $1.2 trillion bill, but that only included $550 billion in new spending. So it's roughly 1/5 of the initial proposal that the president made. Next slide, please. So of that, of the new spending, more than half of that is for transportation, which obviously is good for you. It's for both roads, but it's also for transit. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's really key to note that of the new spending, more than 1/3 will be actually granted by DOT via competitive applications. This is new. It wasn't that long ago, before really the Tiger Grant program, that almost 100% of federal funding for transportation was, at least surface transportation, was provided as formula funding to states, and there was very little ability to go after discretionary funds. That is beginning to change, as you can see through this bill, where about 1/3 of that new spending on transportation, about $105 billion over 5 years, will be granted. So right now, Pete Buttigieg and the administration are going to have a big say in how these funds are doled out. But it's also important to keep in mind that this is a 5-year bill, so that there could be a new administration in 3 years that would end up implementing the final 2 years of this bill. So I think whatever this administration prioritizes is important to take note of for the next 3 years. But after that, there could be, hypothetically, another administration that would change priorities. I think it's important also to note that really this bill is not as transformational as originally envisioned. President Biden had really focused on greening the transportation sector significantly, and also doing a lot more in the sort of environmental justice realm. This bill really doesn't do as much of that. It kind of maintains status quo. It maintains a lot of the same programs. It maintains, people in whatever state in the country may be able to simply build new highways without reevaluating other investments that they might be able to make in order to not build those new highways. So again, not as transformational. I think that while there's a lot of winners in this bill, I think that rail is the biggest probably, and that's less important to you. It's that money will primarily flow to Amtrak, and I think much of it will be spent in the Northeast Corridor. And last but not least, a key takeaway is that this is not the Obama-era stimulus bill. We've already talked about how it's a 5-year bill. There is no focus on job creation or putting people back to work. Instead, people are trying to invest in the best and smartest investments. So with respect to the surface transportation programs, there are about 15 new programs that will be created that are discretionary grant programs that will have opportunities for competitive grants. I think you all are familiar with, for instance, the recently passed American Rescue Plan that did provide money for state and local governments. Just to give you an idea of how the process is to develop new programs, that bill included maybe 2 to 3 pages of legislative text to provide this funding to state and local governments. Broward County is a recipient as are all communities across the country. We then had Treasury put out 45 pages of guidance, followed by 20 pages of frequently asked questions, roughly, and then they took public comment on the guidance, and they're still finalizing that guidance now 8-9 months after the fact. So it's going to take some time for DOT to set these new programs up, so we're going to have time to plan and prepare. But they're going to be focused on a lot of different transformational projects, certainly safety, resiliency, some carbon reductions, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think it goes without saying that some of the existing programs that you are familiar with, the RAISE, Build, Tiger, which is all the same program, just under different names, under different administrations, that's going to continue to exist, but with more funding, as is the infra program. Next slide, please. With respect to transit funding, this is key because this is the New Start funding that you've heard about through the Capital Investment Grant Program because of all the discussion just prior to me about the Broward Commuter Rail project. So transit funding is also a pretty significant winner. Broadly speaking, there is about a 63% increase in funding from current levels under the FAST Act. There are increases in formula and grant programs. So for an example, one of the primary formula programs is the 5307 program. You'll see that Miami, the UZA, which you're a part of, received $173 million in fiscal year 2021. But by 2026, that will actually go up by about $70 million, which is a very significant increase. So just locally, in terms of formula funding, you all will be seeing more. And then importantly, again, this capital investment grant program will have a tremendously larger amount of money to help support Broward Commuter Rail and any other programs that you might try to pursue through the CIG program. Next slide, please. Sorry, you're already there. So what do we expect next? You know, we've already heard, for instance, that the Department of Energy is apparently going to hire 1,000 new employees. I would imagine that the Department of Transportation is probably going to have to do something similar. It's likely that even FDOT, for instance, will have to hire new people. I mean, the amount of money coming to FDOT is going to increase immediately just for traditional surface transportation by about $500 million in a year. And that's aside from the discretionary funds. So a lot of additional money will be flowing to the state. A lot of additional money will be flowing locally for transit investments. And that's going to take manpower and people. Not only is it going to take some hiring on the construction end, I'm sure, as well. So if there are existing grant opportunities like the RAISE program, for instance, like the INFRA program with new funding, I would anticipate the administration will be able to turn out those programs pretty quickly. They actually just released the prior round of RAISE grants. They made the announcements today with respect to which projects were funded. For new grant opportunities, and I mentioned there were 12 to 15 new opportunities that will be available over the next 5 years. It's going to take some time to develop those. Could require public participation, so that will give us a chance to sort of weigh in as appropriate on helping DOT shape some of these programs. But there will be a lot to do. And again, I think the final point I make is just remember it's a 5-year bill. Funding is not going to come out all at once. Again, in terms of transportation or in terms of overall new spending under the bill, that $550 billion, that averages out to $110 billion per year. So it is going to come out over the next 5 years. So not everything needs to be done and or ready to go today. We have time to help get you all in a good spot to compete for these funds over the next several years. So with that, happy to answer any questions you may have and appreciate your time.
Does anybody have any questions? No more? Okay. Well, thank you very much for all the information. We really appreciate it.
Happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to head over to the, I forget the...
We're going to adjourn the regular meeting, right? And then the rest of it will be in the workshop?
Sorry?
So we're adjourning the regular meeting
yes.
of the Oversight Board, and
Yes.
we'll resume in another room, in room 430, where we'll begin the workshop.
Yeah, and we'll probably do 1 or 2 presentations that we missed, and that'll be part of the workshop, correct? Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks.